Tonight, we're exploring every Targaryen king, from Aegon I to the Mad King. This story has many layers, but I'll keep the narration soft and calm so you can still drift off. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Long before the first sword was melted to form the Iron Throne, the destiny of House Targaryen was shaped by fire, ash, and a quiet warning. In ancient old Valyria, 40 noble families ruled an empire built on magic and the unmatched power of dragons. The Targaryens were far from the most powerful of these dragon lords, navigating the complex politics of a civilization that believed itself eternal. But eternity ended in a single day of cataclysm. 12 years before the doom of Valyria consumed the peninsula in volcanic fury, a young maiden named Daenerys Targaryen saw the catastrophe in a vision. Her father, Aegon, believed her. Selling their estates, he gathered his family, his wealth, and his 5 dragons, fleeing across the sea to the volcanic island of Dragonstone. To the other dragon lords, this flight was seen as an act of cowardice. But when the doom fell, wiping out the other 39 families in a matter of hours, House Targaryen became the sole survivors of the dragon's fire. For more than a century, they remained on Dragonstone, looking out over the narrow sea. They did not look west to conquer, nor east to rebuild what was lost. They waited, letting the generations pass, while their beasts grew in the warmth of the Dragonmont. During this long exile, the 7 kingdoms of Westeros continued their endless cycle of wars. Kings of winter, storm, and rock fought over shifting borders, unaware that a power unlike any they had ever seen was quietly growing just off their shores. The turning point came with Aegon, a man of quiet intensity and singular ambition. Along with his sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, Aegon looked west and saw a single, unified kingdom waiting to be forged. With 3 massive dragons, Balerion the Black Dread, Vhagar and Meraxes, they crossed the water and landed on the shores of Westeros, beginning a campaign that would establish a dynasty enduring for 283 years. The history of this monarchy is a sweeping, tragic cycle of conquest, consolidation, decay, and eventual collapse, spanning 17 kings who sat the Iron Throne. It is a story of how a family of foreign conquerors tried to rule a continent that never truly forgot they were outsiders. In the beginning, their authority was absolute, guaranteed by the terrifying shadows their dragons cast over the lands. But as the years wore on, family rivalries and devastating civil wars tore the house apart. The dragons eventually died, leaving the later kings to rule with only the fragile tools of human politics and the fading memory of their ancestral terror. From the golden age of peace to the bloody dark ages of kinslaying and madness, the throne room of the Red Keep saw men of genius, warriors, scholars, and tyrants. Each king who took the crown left an indelible mark on the realm. To understand the 7 kingdoms, we must look back to the very beginning, to the man who looked across the water and saw an empire waiting to be born. The fire that consumed Valyria was not an ordinary disaster. It was the death of a world. In a single day, the greatest civilization humanity had ever built was erased from the map. The 40 Dragon Lord families who had ruled the peninsula for thousands of years were gone, all except one. Aegon Targaryen had been laughed at by his peers. They called him a coward for listening to the dreams of his daughter, Daenerys. She was not a sorceress, not a priestess, just a young woman with the blood of old Valyria running strong in her veins. She saw the mountains splitting, she saw the sea boiling, she saw a rain of fire that would turn stone to slag and wipe the proudest families from history. Her father took the warning seriously. They sold their holdings in the capital and sailed for the westernmost edge of the Valyrian world. The very name of their house became a joke amongst the other dragon lords. They were the ones who ran away. House Targaryen survives the cataclysmic doom of Valyria, thanks to the prophetic visions of Daenerys the Dreamer. The irony is bitter. The laughter of the Dragon Lords was silenced as their empire folded in on itself in geological fury. The Targaryens did not just survive, they became the sole living representatives of a fallen god. They carried the weight of an entire civilization on their shoulders. Their new home was Dragonstone, a fortress carved from volcanic rock, a grim and inhospitable place. It was never meant to be a capital. The Valyrians had built it as an outpost, a guard post against the sprawling kingdoms of the west. It possessed a volcano of its own, the Dragonmont, whose fires were warm enough to cradle the last dragons in the known world. The Targaryens brought 5 dragons with them from Valyria. Over the generations that followed, those dragons grew, and their numbers swelled in the relative safety of the island. The family relocates to the volcanic outpost of Dragonstone, preserving the world's last remaining dragons. They were isolated on a harsh shore, surrounded by a sea that separated them from the ruined world they had left behind, and the primitive kingdoms of Westeros that lay just to the west. They kept their blood pure through traditions that would make later generations recoil. Marriage between brother and sister was not scandalous to them. It was how they kept the dragon flame burning bright. They were a people apart, a living relic of an age of fire and sorcery. For more than 100 years, the Targaryens stayed on Dragonstone. They watched the smoke rise from Valyria. They saw the endless chaos of the free cities as refugees fled the doom. They watched the long, bloody wars of Westeros. They could have intervened at any time. They had dragons, they had ambition, but they waited. For over a century, the Targaryens look eastward toward Essos before Aegon turns his gaze to the fractured 7 kingdoms of Westeros. They look to the land of their ancestors, perhaps hoping for a miracle, for a revival of the old empire. It never came. Slowly, the attention of the house shifted. Aegon Targaryen grew up listening to stories of a unified Valyria. He saw the 7 kingdoms as a fractured mirror of what his ancestors had once commanded. Where his father and grandfather saw a dangerous and chaotic foreign land, Aegon saw a kingdom waiting to be shaped. He was not a man of loud boasts or grand gestures. He was calculating. He studied the wars of the Stormlands, the Reach, the North. He learned the weaknesses of the kings of Westeros. He knew that his family possessed something no one else in the world had anymore: the dragons. The Balerion that Aegon rode was born on Dragonstone, a beast that had never known the chains of the Valyrian capital. It was a creature of pure, unbounded power. When Aegon finally gave the command, it was not a desperate lunge for glory. It was a calculated move, made by a man who had spent his entire life studying the 300 miles of water that separated him from his destiny. He did not land in a great storm of fire. He landed where no king expected him, and he built a fort of wood and earth on the shore, marking the first claim of a dynasty that would reshape the world. After the doom of Valyria turned the peninsula of the Freehold into a smoking graveyard, House Targaryen stood alone. They were the last dragon lords in all the world. For over a century, they waited on the volcanic island of Dragonstone, living in the shadow of a fallen empire and watching the chaos of Westeros from across the Narrow Sea. They were lords of the Narrow Sea, but a dragon is not meant to linger in a lair forever. Aegon, the Lord of Dragonstone, nurtured an ambition that would burn across a continent. With his 2 sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, and their 3 living dragons, Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar, Aegon began what history has never forgotten: the Conquest. At the time of Aegon's landing, Westeros was fractured into 7 kingdoms. They fought endless wars over borders, grudges, and the whims of prideful kings. Aegon the Conqueror unleashed his 3 dragons, Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar, upon the warring kings of Westeros. He did not land in the heart of an existing kingdom. He chose the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, a muddy and undeveloped stretch of coast. Here his forces constructed the first fortification, the Aegon Fort, and from this humble beginning, he sent a single message across the land: crown or death. King Harrenhal of the Iron Islands and the Riverlands laughed at the demands of a boy king from Dragonstone. He ruled from Harrenhal, the mightiest castle ever built in Westeros, with walls so thick and high that he believed no fire could touch him. Aegon did not bother laying siege. He took Balerion the Black Dread, the largest dragon since the age of Old Valyria, and he went to meet the walls of Harrenhal. The flames of Balerion did not just burn the fortress, they melted the very stone. The towers softened, sagged, and collapsed. Harren and all his sons were roasted inside their own iron halls. House Hall was extinguished in a single night. The Riverlands, freed from ironborn tyranny, were the first to kneel to the new power rising in the east. Next came the Stormlands. King Argilac the Arrogant was a warrior of immense pride. He believed his knights could pierce any dragon hide. Rhaenys and Meraxes met him in the field. Argilac fought with the fury of the storm itself. But a lion does not fear the wind, and a dragon does not fear a storm. He fell. His lands, his sigil, and his daughter were absorbed into the growing realm of House Targaryen. The last of the Storm Kings was gone, but the greatest resistance, the battle that would define the entire tone of the Conquest, occurred in the heart of the Reach. King Mern the Gardener of the Reach and King Loren Lannister of the Rock united their hosts. They brought the largest army seen in Westeros since the dawn of the first men. 55,000 men, thousands of armoured knights. They met the Targaryens on an open field south of the Golden Road. The very ground shook under the weight of their advance, and then the shadows fell from the sky. The Field of Fire demonstrated the absolute military supremacy of dragon warfare, melting the armies of the Reach and the Rock. Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys descended upon the combined host with all three dragons at once. Balerion unleashed his flame upon the center of the army. Meraxes struck the flank. Vhagar swept over the reserve. The heat was so intense that it did not simply burn men alive. It melted the steel armor off their bodies. Knights were fused to their saddles. Swords turned into puddles of molten metal. Shields became pools of fire. 4,000 men died in a single afternoon. King Mern the Gardener perished with all his sons and brothers. His entire line ended on that field. The kingdom of the Reach, the most powerful and fertile of the Seven Kingdoms, was erased. King Loren the Lion saw his army turn to ashes and threw his crown to the ground. He bent the knee. The Rock fell without a fight. News of the Field of Fire travelled faster than any raven. The remaining kings took the measure of the Targaryens and made their choices. In the west, the Lannisters knelt. In the south, the Reach was without a king. In the east, the Stormlands were conquered. Only the north remained defiant. King Torrhen Stark of Winterfell, the blood of the first men, called his banners. He crossed the neck with 30,000 spears, the largest army the north had gathered since the age of the Kings of Winter. He reached the Trident, and there, on the far bank, he saw them. The Targaryen host, the three dragons circling in the sky above their banners. He knew the stories of Harrenhal. He had received the desperate ravens of the Field of Fire. Torrhen Stark was no craven, but he was a leader who loved his people. He looked at his 30,000 spears. He looked at the skies. And he understood the terrible arithmetic of dragonfire against northern flesh. King Torrhen Stark knelt to save his people, cementing Aegon's status as the undisputed lord of the Seven Kingdoms. He crossed the Trident a king and returned a subject. The north had submitted without a single arrow fired. It was an act not of shame, but of profound wisdom. Torrhen saved his realm from annihilation. He is known to history as the king who knelt. But in the north, the sacrifice of his crown to spare his people's blood is honored by those who truly understand what it means to bend the knee. With the north's submission, the conquest of the southern continent was effectively complete. Aegon had fused 7 warring nations into a single dynasty. Dorne, in the deep south, resisted. The Martells of Sunspear used the desert and a guerrilla war that the dragons could not easily win. Aegon was wise enough to let Dorne be for the time being, knowing that a unified realm was stronger than a burned one. Aegon was crowned in Old Town by the High Septon. He was anointed with the 7 oils and accepted as the rightful king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. He began the construction of a new capital on the site of his first fort, a sprawling city that would become King's Landing, and from the swords of his fallen enemies he forged a throne, the Iron Throne, 1,000 blades, a throne not meant for comfort, but for power, a constant, jagged reminder to every man, woman and child in Westeros of the price of rebellion. Aegon I, the Conqueror, the Lord of the 7 Kingdoms, had created a realm that would bear his family's name for nearly 300 years. But forging a kingdom is one thing. Holding it together across generations, keeping the succession smooth, and raising heirs capable of wielding such absolute authority is entirely another. Aegon had fire, blood, and dragons. His son Aenys, born of Rhaenys, inherited the throne. He was gentle, learned, and kind, a good man for a peaceful time. But in the world Aegon built, gentleness was a vulnerability the realm could not afford. The stability of the 7 kingdoms rested entirely on the strength of the Targaryen sitting the throne, and with dragons still in the world, weakness was a luxury that could burn a dynasty to the ground. The Field of Fire broke the spine of organized resistance in the south. King Loren Lannister and King Mern Gardner, the most powerful rulers the continent had seen outside of the Targaryens themselves, both knelt. Loren swore fealty and was allowed to keep his lands as Warden of the West. Mern was dead, his entire line extinguished in the flames. The reach passed to the Tyrells, a house of stewards who wisely bent the knee rather than burn. Aegon's war was effectively won in that single, decisive battle, not simply by dragonfire, but by the absolute and terrifying demonstration that the old order of kings was obsolete. The only question left was where to build a new world from the ashes of the old. Aegon did not return to Dragonstone as his seat of power. He needed a capital that was central, a place that belonged to no single kingdom and therefore could belong to all of them. He chose the 3 hills at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, a humble fishing village that would grow into a city unlike any Westeros had ever seen. Here, his forces raised a massive castle of wood and earth, a crude fortification they called the Aegon Fort. But Aegon knew that a wooden castle would not hold the loyalty of a continent. He needed a symbol, and so he gathered the swords of his fallen enemies, thousands upon thousands of blades taken from the dead of the Field of Fire, from the ruins of Harrenhal, from every battlefield of the Conquest. He commanded the greatest of his dragons to breathe fire upon this vast pile of steel. Balerion the Black Dread unleashed his flame, melting the metal into a molten mass, and then Aegon himself shaped the ruin, twisting the swords into a monstrous, jagged seat. It was not a throne of comfort, it was a throne of power, deliberately sharp and menacing. Legend says, the first king warned that a king should never sit easy. The Iron Throne was a constant reminder of the cost of defiance. The capital that grew around this seat of power was named King's Landing, marking the very spot where the conqueror first set foot upon the continent to begin his war. It replaced every ancient seat of every old king. It was the new axis of Westeros. The realm was unified in name, but not in spirit. Storm's End bent the knee. The Vale submitted. The North knelt without a fight. But one kingdom remained defiant, Dorne. They had never been conquered by the Andals, and they had no intention of being conquered by a dragon lord. This was the first great test of Aegon's peace. To leave Dorne independent was to admit the crown was not absolute. To conquer it, however, was a task far easier ordered than accomplished. In the 4th year after the conquest, Aegon launched the First Dornish War. His sisters led the campaigns. Rhaenys scouted the terrain from the back of Meraxes, while Visenya burned castles from Vhagar. Rhaenys was Aegon's most beloved queen, bright and curious, a stark contrast to the stern Visenya. She enjoyed flying low over the Dornish mountains, perhaps lulled into a sense of security by years of unchallenged dominance. The Dornish did not meet them in open field. They melted into the desert, struck at supply lines and laid traps. They knew they could not kill a dragon in the air, but they understood they could wait for a single moment of opportunity. Over the castle of Hellholt, that moment came. A scorpion bolt, a massive iron spear, found Meraxes' eye. The dragon crashed to the earth, killing the queen instantly. Rhaenys Targaryen was dead. Meraxes, the Mount of the Conqueror's own sister-wife, was dead. The Targaryens had always traded on an aura of invincibility. This single act shattered that myth entirely. Aegon's fury became legendary. He took Balerion and burned every castle, every town, every village the Dornish could not hide. The histories call it the Dragon's Wrath, a year of unparalleled destruction. But it did not break dawn. Aegon learned a truth that would define the rest of his reign. Dragons cannot hold what they burn. The war ended in a stalemate, the first true limitation of Targaryen power, exposed for the entire realm to witness. Dawn remained free. The shadow of Rhaenys' loss lingered over the rest of Aegon's life. He never truly recovered, yet his work was far from finished. For the next 30 years, Aegon did not conquer. He consolidated. He embarked on a series of royal progresses, traveling the realm to show his face to the small folk, to hear petitions, and to personally enforce the king's peace. He slowly blended the iron fist of Valyrian supremacy with the established customs of the people he now ruled. He adopted the faith of the Seven, the dominant religion of Westeros, marrying the traditions of the conqueror with the beliefs of the conquered. He commissioned the building of the King's Road, a massive stone highway stretching from the wall to the capital, binding the north to the south with a ribbon of trade and military movement. He created the Kingsguard, 7 knights sworn for life to protect the king and his family. He refined the system of governance, relying on the lords who had bent the knee, granting them autonomy in exchange for loyalty and taxes. It was a delicate balance, but Aegon held it steady. He ruled for 37 years. He died on Dragonstone in the year 37, after the Conquest, in his sleep, of a stroke, a peaceful death for a king who had reshaped a continent with fire and blood. Aegon the Conqueror was gone. The realm he built faced its first great test, not from a foreign invader, but from the very nature of succession. The crown settled on the head of his eldest son by Rhaenys, a prince named Aenys. But the legacy of the father is a heavy crown to bear, and the first king was a difficult act to follow. The kingdom Aegon united had never truly become one beneath the surface, and without his singular will and the presence of the Black Dread in his prime, the iron blades of the throne began to cut their new master, just as sharply as they had once been meant to cut his enemies. Aenys inherited a throne of swords, and the challenge of ruling a dynasty without the founder's fire. When Aegon the Conqueror finally passed away in his bed, in the 37th year after the Conquest, he left behind a kingdom forged in fire and blood. The Iron Throne was his legacy, a monument of melted swords, but the stability of the realm was still an incredibly fragile thing. He had built the crown on the back of Balerion the Black Dread, and the crushing weight of a personal authority wielded like a living god. Without that relentless presence holding the continent together by sheer force of will, the structure he built began to tremble almost immediately. He was succeeded by his eldest son, Aenys I. Aenys inherited a unified realm but lacked the iron will of his father, immediately leading to rebellions across the continent. Where Aegon was thunder and flame, Aenys was diplomacy and quiet contemplation. He was a gentle king, born to Queen Rhaenys, and he preferred the company of scholars and maesters to soldiers and sworn swords. The lords of Westeros had only truly bowed to Aegon because they feared the shadow of his dragons. Without that terror pressing down on every lord and landed knight, They saw Aenys's soft nature as an invitation to reclaim their old independence. The first cracks appeared in the Reach and the Iron Islands. Ambitious lords who had sworn fealty to the dragon rose up, testing the new king's resolve. Aenys hesitated. He sent ravens. He parleyed. He hoped for peaceful reconciliation. But in the political landscape of Westeros, hesitation is almost universally interpreted as weakness, and the rebellions only spread further like a sickness through the body of the realm. However, the most dangerous threat to the young dynasty was not a lord with an army. It was the faith itself. The faith militant rises in open revolt, condemning Targaryen incestuous marriage practices as an abomination. Aeneas had married his own sister, Rhaena, following the old incestuous traditions of Valyria, to keep the bloodline pure. For the Andals and the First Men, this was a sin beyond measure, a corruption of the natural order. The High Septon had tolerated Aegon's power because he could not oppose it, but he would not tolerate this violation of the sacred texts. The faith militant, the army of the church, took up their weapons once more. The stars and the swords of the faithful marched against the dragons. It was a war of ideology against dynasty. Aenys had no good answer. He could not surrender his family's traditions, and he could not defeat an idea with an army. The weight of it all proved too heavy for him to bear. Aenys collapses under the stress of governance, fleeing King's Landing and leaving the throne vulnerable to his brutal half-brother. He abandoned the capital, taking his family to the relative safety of Dragonstone, the ancestral Targaryen fortress. He left the Iron Throne empty, a symbol of power left completely untended. It was the ultimate admission of defeat. The realm needed a king, and in the vacuum created by Aenys's fear, a very different kind of ruler stepped forward to fill the void. That ruler was Maegor, his half-brother, born to Queen Visenya. Maegor was iron, not flesh. He was a warrior from birth, blooded and scarred. Where Aenys fled, Maegor marched. He took charge of the situation, not as a steward, but as a conqueror, taking what was his. The throne was vulnerable, and the cruel hand of Maegor was about to close around it. Aenys passed away shortly after his flight, some say of a broken heart, leaving the path open for a reign of absolute terror. The era of the conqueror was truly over. The era of the cruel was about to begin. Maegor did not wait for a formal coronation or the consensus of the realm's lords. Backed by his formidable mother, Queen Visenya, and riding the colossal Balerion, the Black Dread, he flew straight to King's Landing to seize the crown. Though Aenys had eldest sons who were the rightful heirs, Maegor brushed their claims aside, declaring that only the strong were fit to sit upon the Iron Throne. To prove his point, he challenged any man who questioned his right to rule to single combat. The faith rose to meet this challenge. In the streets of the capital, a legendary trial of 7 took place. 7 warriors of the faith militant faced Maegor and his 6 champions. It was a bloodbath of epic proportions, leaving Maegor as the sole survivor of his side, clinging to life. When he finally woke from his coma 28 days later, his vengeance was swift and terrible. Mounted on Balerion, Maegor bathed the sept of remembrance in dragonfire, burning hundreds of the warriors' sons alive as they prayed. He showed the realm that he would not negotiate with the gods, nor would he bow to their priests. To secure his legacy, he oversaw the completion of the Red Keep, a massive fortress designed to withstand any siege. But Maegor's paranoia grew with his power. Once the castle was finished, he executed every mason, builder and architect who had worked on it, ensuring that only he would ever know the secret passages and hidden escape routes built into the stone. His reign was defined by this relentless, suffocating violence, proving to all of Westeros that the dragon's shadow could be far darker than they had ever imagined. Aenys left a shattered legacy. The faith militant marched in open rebellion, their swords and stars raised against the dragons they had once feared. The lords of the 7 kingdoms, never truly loyal, tested the limits of the dragon's peace. It would not hold, not under a weak king. Aenys had tried to be gentle, but the kingdoms do not respect gentleness in a dragon rider. They respect strength, and strength was stirring on Dragonstone. Across the narrow sea, in the shadow of the volcano, a different kind of Targaryen had been waiting. Maegor, the son of Aegon the Conqueror, and his second wife, the Lady Velaryon, a giant of a man with a scarred face and arms thick as tree trunks. His eyes held no tenderness, no doubt. He had Balerion, the Black Dread, the last of the great dragons from the Age of Heroes, and he had a plan rooted in the oldest Targaryen tradition, fire and blood. Maegor did not simply claim the crown. He shattered the line of succession and took it by force. His brother Aenys was dead, but Aenys had left a son, the Prince Aegon, the rightful heir. They called him Aegon the Uncrowned. He was young, brave, and mounted on the dragon Quicksilver. He flew to meet his uncle above the God's Eye. It was the first dragon duel since the Conquest, and it lasted only moments. Balerion, ancient and vast, his scales hard as iron, tore Quicksilver from the sky with a burst of flame and claw. The young prince and his dragon crashed into the deep green waters of the lake. Maegor had won. The Iron Throne was his. Maegor, the first of his name, known to history as Maegor the Cruel, claimed the throne in blood, and his reign began with a terrible purpose. His primary target was the faith militant. He did not seek to negotiate or find a compromise as his brother had failed to do. He waged a bloody war of extermination. The warriors' sons and the poor fellows were broken in the field. Maegor burned their holy places. The starry sept in Old Town felt his wrath. He outlawed their orders and executed their leaders without mercy. In the halls of the faith, he had the High Septon and 60 of his most holy brothers put to the sword. Any man caught wearing the badge of the warrior's son was hanged. Any Septon who spoke against the crown was sent to the wall. He did not want their surrender. He wanted their extinction. The realm learned that this new king had no mercy. If the gods would not bow to the dragon would make the gods bleed. As the war raged, Maegor turned his attention to the symbol of his family's permanence. King's Landing had grown rapidly around the hill, where Aegon had begun his fortress, but the fortress was not finished. Maegor oversaw its completion, driving the builders to heights of ambition the Seven Kingdoms had never seen. He called it the Red Keep, for the colour of the stone his masons brought from the south. It was a castle fit for a dragon lord. He built the high towers, the great hall, and the deep foundations, and within that stone he wove a labyrinth. Secret passageways wound through the walls, hidden staircases twisted inside the towers. Maegor knew that the men who built these secrets could become a weapon against him. Knowledge was the most dangerous currency a king could allow. When the final stone was laid, when the last tower was crowned, Maegor summoned every man who had worked on the keep. He thanked them, he paid them handsomely in gold, and then he had them all executed. Every mason, every carpenter, every architect who knew the truth of the Red Keep's bones was put to the sword, their blood soaked into the stone. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves. The secrets of the Red Keep died with them, sealed in blood and silence. A king must have his secrets, but no amount of castles can protect a king from the loneliness of absolute power. Maegor's cruelty did not bring him loyalty, it brought him fear, and fear is a poor foundation for a dynasty. He took several wives in the tradition of old Valyria, hoping for a son. But the children died, and the queen suffered. His own lords grew weary of his heavy hand. His hand of the king, Lord Rhaegar Baratheon, fled the capital and joined the growing rebellion. The queen, Rhaena Targaryen, turned against him. The lords of the realm, one by one, abandoned his cause. He was surrounded by enemies, sitting at the head of a table of ghosts. Even Balerion, the mightiest weapon in the world, could not hold the realm together by terror alone. The realm had had enough of fire and blood. In the 48th year after Aegon's conquest, Maegor sat the Iron Throne one final time. The great hall was empty. The gleam of the 1,000 swords flickered in the torchlight. His reign of terror had lasted 6 years. 6 years of fire and blood, of war and execution, of building and destroying. And his body was found in the morning, The throne had cut him. His wrists were slashed. The blades of the Iron Throne are said to be sharp enough to cut a man who does not belong there. No one knows if he did it to himself, or if the throne itself, forged from the swords of his father's enemies, had finally claimed its master. He was the first Targaryen king to die without a clear successor, a tyrant who had destroyed everything around him and left nothing behind but a kingdom, heaving a long, deep sigh of relief. And so the realm that Maegor terrorized was given a chance to breathe. The lords of Westeros gathered. They had seen what weak rule brought under Aenys. They had seen what cruel rule brought under Maegor. They wanted balance. They wanted wisdom. They turned to a boy of 14, the grandson of Aenys I, a son of the dragon who had never known war. They gave him the crown. His name was Aerys, and the long, hard work of healing the wounds of the dynasty, of building a reign of peace upon the ashes of the reign of terror, was about to begin. When Maegor the Cruel finally died upon the Iron Throne in the year 48 after Aegon's conquest, the realm he left behind was not a kingdom but a wound. The faith militant had been scattered, but not destroyed. The great houses had been humbled, but not reconciled, and the Iron Throne itself had become a symbol of terror rather than justice. There was no clear path forward. The weak heirs of Aenys had been pushed aside, and the line of succession was tangled in blood. The realm truly teetered on the edge of collapse, waiting for a ruler who could heal what had been broken. That ruler came in the form of a boy of just 14 years. Aerys I, the second son of Aenys I, had spent the worst years of Maegor's reign in exile at Storm's End, under the protection of Lord Rhaegar Baratheon. When the lords of Westeros gathered to choose a new king, they did not choose another brute. They chose the boy who had been untouched by his uncle's cruelty. Aerys I ascended the throne at age 14, inheriting a broken, war-torn realm on the brink of collapse. The treasury was drained, the roads were unsafe, the faith was hostile, and the memory of Dragonfire was still fresh and fearful in the minds of the small folk. Aerys understood, even at his young age, that force alone could not hold the Seven Kingdoms together. His father Aenys had tried to rule by charm and had failed. His uncle Maegor had tried to rule by fear and had left the realm in ruins. A third path was needed, and so, alongside his sister wife Queen Alysanne, who was herself only 13, Aerys did what no Targaryen king before him had been willing to do. He negotiated. The faith of the Seven had been Maegor's greatest enemy. The warrior sons and the poor fellows had taken up arms against the incest of the Dragon Lords, and Maegor had answered with fire and blood. But Aerys and Alysanne walked into the den of the most devout, not as conquerors, but as conciliators. The terms were careful, almost legalistic in their precision. Aerys agreed to permanently disarm the faith militant, ending the orders of the warrior sons and the poor fellows as military organizations. In exchange, the faith agreed to what became known as the doctrine of exceptionalism. The Targaryens were not bound by the same laws as other men. They were the blood of the dragon, and their traditions, however shocking to the Andals, were to be tolerated. The Iron Throne would protect the faith, and the faith would bless the throne. This was the foundation of Aerys's peace. It was not a truce won at the point of a sword, but a compact written on parchment and sealed with mutual respect. The faith militant was no more. The realm breathed a sigh of relief. With the peace secured, Aerys turned his attention to the bones of the kingdom itself. Aegon the Conqueror had won the realm, but he had never truly unified it. It remained a collection of disparate kingdoms, linked only by their fear of dragons. Aerys wanted them linked by law, by commerce, by shared custom. He began a massive infrastructure campaign, the likes of which Westeros had never seen. The King's Road, a great highway that would run from the Wall in the far north all the way south to Storm's End, was begun under his orders. This was not a road for armies, though armies would use it. It was a road for trade, for travel, for messengers carrying royal writs. It tied the realm together in a way that no conquest ever had. It made the king present in every corner of his domain. Even more importantly, Aerys unified the realm under a single legal code. Before his reign, justice was a local affair. A man accused of theft in the Reach might face a completely different punishment than a man accused of the same crime in the Riverlands. Aerys codified the laws of the Seven Kingdoms, collecting and organizing them into a coherent system that could be applied consistently from the Gift to the Dornish Marches. He established the King's Justice as the highest court in the land, hearing petitions from commoners and lords alike. He walked the realm, accompanied by Alysanne, listening to the grievances of the small folk, settling disputes, granting charters to towns, and elevating trade guilds. The reign of Aerys I lasted 55 years. It was the longest of any Targaryen king, and by almost any measure, it was the most successful. He was called the Conciliator for his peaceful settlement of the faith crisis. He was called the Wise for his legal and administrative reforms. But to history, he is most often remembered as the king who proved that the Targaryen dynasty could rule with more than just dragons. By the end of his life, the realm was peaceful, prosperous, and united. But even the wisest king cannot foresee every shadow. Aerys outlived several of his children. His chosen heir, Prince Balon, died before him. Faced with a difficult succession between Balon's son Viserys and the daughter of his firstborn son, Aemon, Aerys called a great council at Harrenhal in the year 101 after the Conquest. Over 1,000 lords travelled to the ruined castle by the God's Eye to cast their voices for one claimant or another. The council chose Viserys, passing over the female line entirely. It was a decision that preserved the peace of Jaehaerys' own era, but it established a precedent that would be tested and broken in the generations to come. The seeds of the next great crisis, the crisis that would drown the realm in dragonfire, were planted in the very stability of his golden age. The realm he had so carefully constructed was strong, but nothing built by man is immune to the slow corrosion of time and ambition. With the faith militant disarmed and the realm finally at peace, Jaehaerys and Alysanne could begin the work of rebuilding in earnest. The boy king, who had inherited a bleeding kingdom, was determined to leave it stronger than he had found it, and he had 55 years to accomplish that goal. What followed was the longest period of sustained peace, prosperity, and population growth the Seven Kingdoms had ever seen or would ever see again. This was the long peace. Jaehaerys reigned as the Conciliator, and he earned that title not through conquest, but through careful, steady governance. The realm experiences unprecedented prosperity and population growth during Jaehaerys' 55-year reign. King's Landing swelled to nearly 500,000 souls. The Crownlands flourished under direct rule. Jaehaerys standardized the coinage, establishing a unified currency across the Seven Kingdoms for the first time. He compiled a unified code of law drawn from the best practices of every region, resolving centuries of conflicting legal traditions. He reformed the King's Landing Watch into a proper gold-cloaked police force. He built roads, encouraged trade, and appointed a system of royal justices who travelled the realm to deliver the king's justice directly. Queen Alysanne was his partner in every sense of the word. She travelled the realm from the wall to the arbour, witnessing firsthand the struggles of small folk and lords alike. She persuaded Jaehaerys to abolish the lord's right to the first night, a custom still practised in the north and the Iron Islands that permitted lords to bed peasant brides on their wedding night. She helped him negotiate the marriage that brought the north closer to the crown, and convinced him to grant the Night's Watch a massive stretch of land called the New Gift, ensuring the order could sustain itself for generations. But the long peace was not without its deep and private shadows. For the royal couple, the greatest battles were fought not against rebellious lords, but against time, fate, and their own failing bodies. Personal tragedies strike the royal family as Jaehaerys and Alysanne lose multiple heirs to disease, rebellion, and childbirth. Of their 13 children, only 9 reached adulthood, and several of those would predecease their parents. Their firstborn daughter, Daenerys, died of the shivers at only 7 years old. Their second son, Aemon, was a brilliant knight and heir apparent who died in the 92nd year of the Targaryen era, struck down by crossbow bolts while defending the Targaryen fleet against Myrish pirates. His death shattered Alizan. Their third son, Balon, was a beloved warrior and hand of the king who died in the 101st year of a burst belly. Their daughter Alyssa died in childbed. One by one the children fell. Diella died in childbirth. Visera died in a riding accident. Syra fled across the sea in disgrace. The nurseries and training yards of the Red Keep, once so full of life and the laughter of young Targaryens, grew steadily quieter, and as the children fell, the succession fractured. The aging king is forced to confront the looming question of succession as his direct male line begins to fracture. When Prince Balon died, Jaehaerys was 73 years old. He had outlived 3 of his sons. The only man who remained who could stand as heir was his grandson, Viserys, the son of Balon. But Viserys had a rival, Lyonor Velaryon, the son of Aemon's daughter Rhaenys, the queen who never was. The question of who would sit the Iron Throne after Jaehaerys could no longer be ignored, and so, in the 101st year of the Targaryen dynasty, the king summoned the lords of Westeros to a great council at Harrenhal. Nearly 1,000 lords and representatives of the faith gathered to decide the succession. It was an unprecedented act, a king handing the fate of his dynasty to the voices of the realm. The council debated for 13 days. Viserys represented the male line, the son of the king's son. Lyonor represented the blood of the firstborn, through Aemon's daughter Rhaenys. In the end, the lords chose Viserys by a vote of 20-1. They feared a child king, and they preferred a grown man trained to rule. Jaehaerys accepted their judgment. Alizan did not. She argued openly against the decision, warning that it set a dangerous precedent that would marginalize women and their descendants for generations. She was correct. The Great Council of 101 AC established a clear precedent. The Iron Throne would not pass to a woman, nor through a woman, so long as a male claimant of the direct line existed. It was a decision that seemed to settle everything. In truth, it settled nothing. It planted a seed of bitterness in House Velaryon, and it failed to account for the simple truth that Viserys, for all his good qualities, would one day struggle with the exact same problem his grandfather had faced. The aging king reigned on for 2 more years. Queen Alizan died in the 100th year of the century, in the arms of her husband. Jaehaerys died 3 years later, in the 103rd year, at the age of 69. His was the longest and most successful reign in Targaryen history. He left behind a realm that was rich, peaceful, and united. He also left behind a succession that was legally settled, but politically fragile. The great question of who would sit the throne had been answered by the lords of Westeros. The peace he had built for half a century now rested on the shoulders of Viserys, the grandson who had been chosen in that field at Harrenhal. The boy king who had become the old king was gone, and the realm prepared for its first new monarch in 55 years. The reign of Jaehaerys I was a tapestry woven from decades of careful planning, legal reform, and profound personal tragedy. By the year 101 after the Conquest, the strongest thread in that tapestry had begun to fray: the succession of the Iron Throne. The old king had outlived his sons. Prince Aemon, his firstborn, and the heir for 20 years, had been killed by a crossbow bolt in the Myrish woods. Prince Balon, the second son, and a beloved warrior, had died of a sudden burst belly within the walls of the Red Keep. The king was ancient, his body failing, and the question of who would rule after him had become a dangerous uncertainty. Prince Aemon had left behind a daughter, Rhaenys, a fierce and dragon-riding woman, married to Lord Corlys Velaryon, the wealthiest man in the 7 kingdoms. Through her the claim fell to her son, Lyonor Velaryon. Prince Balon had left his own sons, the eldest of whom was a passionate and determined man named Viserys. The realm faced a stark choice between a boy in the shadow of his mother and a man grown, and between a female line and a male one. The potential for civil war hung in the air like smoke over a dry forest. Aerys, frail but still sharp of mind, refused to let his life's work dissolve into bloodshed. He chose a path unprecedented in the history of the Targaryen dynasty. Rather than let the realm burn in open conflict, Aerys summoned the lords of Westeros to Harrenhal to vote on the royal succession, preventing a potential civil war by submitting the question to the collective voice of the realm. The ruined castle of Harren the Black, a monument to the fate of those who defied dragon lords, became the stage for a decision that would shape the future of the Iron Throne. Over the course of 2 moons, the lords of the 7 kingdoms gathered beneath the blackened, twisted towers. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of history. The candidates presented themselves. Princess Rhaenys spoke for her son Lynor, but it was Viserys who commanded the greater support. Lord Stark spoke for Viserys. Lord Tyrell spoke for Viserys. The great houses of the realm lined up behind the son of Balon. They saw a man of 34, a rider of the dragon Caraxes, a proven leader. They saw a boy of 7, and they saw a woman behind him. When the votes were counted, the result was overwhelming. The council chose Viserys over Lyonor Velaryon by a margin of 20-1. The decision was framed as the will of the realm, and with it came an undeniable consequence. The council had established a lasting precedent that the Iron Throne could not pass to or through a woman. The die was cast. Rhaenys, the queen who never was, left Harrenhal in fury, her dragon Melis carrying her away from the scene of her defeat. Lord Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, brooded on his island fortress of Driftmark, a proud man nursing a wounded ambition. Aerys had secured the succession. The war he had feared was avoided. He formally named Viserys his heir, and satisfied that the realm was in capable hands, peacefully slipped away in his bed in the year 103. The death of Aerys I marks the final end of the Targaryen Golden Age. He left behind a realm that had known peace for nearly 60 years, a realm united under a single legal code and a single crown. But it was a peace that rested on the fragile authority of an aging king's final compromise. The empire was peaceful, but it was politically fragile. The wounds of the Great Council had not healed. They had simply gone quiet. King Viserys I took the Iron Throne as a conciliator, a man who valued harmony above all else. He surrounded himself with wise counsel and sought to rule as his father had, preferring the comfort of the court to the harsh discipline of war. But a king who desires peace above all else is often a king who avoids making difficult choices. The precedent of Harrenhal was clear, but the heart of the new king was easily swayed by those he loved. The seeds of the next great war, the war that would destroy the dragons, were not planted by enemies. They were planted by a king who could not bear to say no. And soon the skies over Westeros would turn red again. The Great Council of 101 AC had settled the succession in the most public way imaginable. The Lords of Westeros, assembled at Harrenhal, chose Viserys, the eldest son of Prince Balon, to be the next king. In doing so, they established a precedent, a legal cornerstone that would echo through the decades. The Iron Throne could not pass to a woman, nor through a woman to her male descendants. This decision, as we have seen, paved the way for Viserys to inherit the realm from his grandfather, Aerys the Conciliator, and what a realm he inherited. Viserys I enjoyed a reign of luxury and peace. He was not a conqueror like his namesake, Aegon, nor a builder of laws like Aerys. Instead, he was a king who loved to rule. He threw grand tournaments, feasted his lords, and kept the court in a state of constant celebration. The realm was rich, the treasury full, and for a time it seemed the golden age of the Targaryens would never end. But beneath the surface of this glittering court, seeds of division were quietly taking root, and Viserys, blinded by his own love for harmony and his desire to avoid conflict, refused to see them. The comfort of the king had become the complacency of the king. The first crack appeared in the king's own bedchamber. Viserys' beloved first wife, Queen Aemma of House Arryn, suffered a terrible fate. She conceived a son, a boy who would be named Balon, but the birth was brutal. The maesters were forced to cut the child from the queen's womb to save him, and in doing so, they killed her. The son, the longed-for male heir, lived only a single day. The realm called him Balon the Brave and wept. With no male heir, the succession was thrown into doubt. Viserys, determined to secure the line of his blood, named his daughter, Princess Rhaenyra, as his official heir. He summoned the lords of the realm to the Red Keep and forced them to swear solemn oaths of fealty to her. They knelt before the Iron Throne and pledged their swords to the Princess of Dragonstone. On paper, the succession was secure. In practice, these oaths were oaths sworn to a king who would not live forever. The realm demanded a new queen. The hand of the king, Otto Hightower, a man of sharp ambition and careful counsel, was never far from the king's ear. He arranged for his daughter, Alicent, to comfort the grieving king. Alicent was young, beautiful, and attentive. Viserys, a man who hated loneliness, found solace in her company, and soon they were married. This was the second crack, the widening of the fissure. Alicent did her duty. She gave the king's sons. First Aegon, then Aemond, and then Daeron. Now there were male heirs. Now there was a rival claim. The king's second marriage to Alicent Hightower produced these male heirs, and it created a bitter rivalry that split the Seven Kingdoms down the middle. Those who supported Rhaenyra's claim became known as the Blacks, after the colours of House Targaryen. Those who supported the king's eldest son, Aegon, became known as the Greens, after the sigil of House Hightower. The court became a snake pit of whispers and alliances. The Green faction, led by Queen Alicent and her father, argued that the Great Council's precedent was absolute. A woman could not inherit, they said, and the lords of Westeros had sworn for Viserys based on that very rule. The Blacks, led by Prince Daemon and the young princes of House Velaryon, argued that Rhaenyra was the named heir, that the oaths were binding, and that a king's word was law. Viserys, caught in the middle, refused to take a firm stand. He loved his daughter, and he loved his sons. He wanted everyone to simply get along. He threatened, he cajoled, he demanded unity, but he never actively dismantled the factions. He was a man who desperately wanted peace, but he lacked the ruthlessness to enforce it. His complacency blinded him to the simple truth that power abhors a vacuum. By refusing to choose decisively, or by choosing both sides, he left the throne vulnerable to the storm that was brewing. The king grew old. His health failed him. He became a broken figure, a walking corpse of a man, held together by pain and milk of the poppy. He sat upon the Iron Throne, but he could no longer rule it. The factions did not wait. They gathered their strength, they forged their alliances, and they sharpened their blades and their words. For the conflict they knew was coming. Viserys I had been given every gift: a long peace, a wealthy realm, a family of dragons. But in the end, the greatest gift a king can give his people is a clear and stable succession. Viserys, in his kindness and his weakness, gave them confusion. And confusion, in the Game of Thrones, is a seed that grows into war. The House of the Dragon was no longer united in fire. It was divided by blood. The dance was written in the stars, and the first note of that terrible song was the breaking of an oath. Viserys I had spent the final years of his reign in a haze of infirmity and opiates. The realm knew that King Viserys was a broken man, his body ravaged by the crown's weight, his spirit dulled by loss. But few understood how completely the governance of the Seven Kingdoms had passed from his hands. His hand, Otto Hightower, and the Queen Alicent effectively ruled in his place. The lords had sworn oaths to Rhaenyra, but oaths grow brittle when the king who demanded them is too weak to enforce them. And in the Red Keep, a faction was already moving in the shadows. In the dead of night, in the late autumn of 129 years after Aegon's conquest, Viserys I died in his sleep. He was 52 years old. The king who had once dreamed of a peaceful succession closed his eyes for the last time. unaware that his family was already at war beneath his roof. The moment his breath stopped, the Hightowers sealed the Red Keep. No word was allowed to leave the city. The Green faction moved with a precise, practiced silence that spoke of years of preparation. Otto Hightower, Sir Criston Cole, and the other conspirators summoned the city watch and secured the gates. They waved the gold cloaks and readied the treasury. Lord Lyman Beesbury, the Master of Coin, protested the usurpation. He was a man of his oaths. Beesbury reminded them of the vows sworn to Rhaenyra. Sir Criston Cole silenced him permanently. The body was thrown down a well. This was not a council meeting. It was a murder dressed in robes of state. Before dawn had fully broken over Blackwater Bay, the Dowager Queen Alicent had placed her son, Aegon II, upon the Iron Throne. The silence in the dragon pit was deafening. The dragons sensed it before the men did. A shift in the balance of power. Sunfire, Aegon's golden dragon, crooned in recognition. The hastily assembled small council and the lords of King's Landing knelt. A king was crowned. A usurpation was complete. The oaths of a generation meant nothing. Aegon himself seemed reluctant at first. He had no love for the crown. But ambition is a thirsty poison, and it did not take long for the taste of power to change a man. He was crowned formally in the dragon pit, before the gathered masses of the city. The High Septon placed the conqueror's crown upon his brow. The crown was heavy, set with rubies from the mines of Valyria. The crowd cheered, and the realm of Westeros felt the first tremors of an earthquake. On Dragonstone, Rhaenyra was in the final weeks of a difficult pregnancy. She had lost her father, and she had felt it in her bones before the Raven ever came. But the message that arrived was not a gentle letter of condolence. It was a declaration of war. Her younger half-brother, the dissolute and reluctant Aegon, had been crowned King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Her father's will had been overturned. Her own birthright had been stolen. Rhaenyra's grief turned to a cold, terrible fury. Her uncle and husband, Prince Daemon, was already sharpening Dark Sister, but Rhaenyra was not a warrior who could ride into battle immediately. She was a queen waiting to give birth, yet a queen she was. She commanded her own coronation in the ancient hall of Dragonstone, the very fortress where Aegon the Conqueror had begun his campaign. The hall was lit by torch and dragon flame. The stone dragons of the Valyrian fortress seemed to watch as Rhaenyra knelt. She wore her father's crown, the golden circlet of Aerys the Conciliator. When she rose, she was no longer just a princess. She was a queen at war, and the war would consume everything she loved. She swore an oath that day, not to forgive but to reclaim. The Blacks were united. The realm was now split down the middle. Dragonstone answered to Rhaenyra. The north, the Riverlands, and the Vale declared for the Black Queen. The west, the Reach and the Stormlands pledged their swords to the Greens. Before the armies could march, before the dragons could darken the skies with their war, there was a final, fragile attempt at diplomacy. Rhaenyra needed allies. She needed to secure the borders. She sent her sons, the princes Jacaerys and Lucerys, on their dragons to treat with the great houses. Jacaerys flew north to Winterfell on his dragon Vermax. Lucerys, young and earnest, flew his dragon Arax to Storm's End to secure the loyalty of Lord Boros Baratheon. It was a mission fraught with danger. Storm's End was home to the Baratheons, but it was also the home of Prince Aemond, Rhaenyra's bitter rival, and the rider of Vargar, the largest and most fearsome dragon in the world. Vargar was the war mount of Queen Visenya herself, an ancient beast of unimaginable destruction, whose roar could shake the foundations of a castle. Lord Boros was non-committal. He was a storm of pride and fury himself, and he did not appreciate being courted by a boy. Aemond was there in the Great Hall, nursing old grudges over a lost eye. He sensed blood. The negotiations collapsed almost immediately. Lucerys, trapped and humiliated, was forced to fly back into the fury of the stormy night. But Aemond was not done. He mounted Vhagar and gave chase over Shipbreaker Bay. What followed was a hunt, not a battle. The rain was lashing. Arax was swift, but Varga was ancient and almost uncontrollable in her fury. Arrax was barely a mouthful for the older dragon. Lucerys tried to climb, to lose them in the clouds, but Arrax was exhausted. Vhagar struck from above. The jaws closed. There was no scream, only the snap of bone and the hiss of dying fire. The last thing Lucerys saw was the rain in his eyes and the shadow of the dragon. The boy prince and his dragon fell into the black waters of the bay. Their bodies were never recovered. It is said that Aemon did not intend to kill the boy, that he only wanted to scare him, to humble him. But the dragon is not the rider. Vhagar was a weapon of war, and a weapon once unleashed cannot be called back. The death of Lucerys was the first true atrocity of the Dance of the Dragons. This was not a declaration of war alone. It was the murder of a child by a member of his own family. It was an unthinkable sin in the eyes of gods and men. When the news reached Dragonstone, Rhaenyra was shattered into pieces. The telling of the tale is said to have caused her to miscarry her daughter. The infant princess was born with the scales of a dragon, deformed and stillborn. Rhaenyra named her Visenya. Daemon received the news as well. He found Rhaenyra in the nursery, holding the stillborn child. He did not speak. There was nothing left to say. The time for words was over. Rhaenyra's rage was not a wildfire. It was the slow grinding heat of a volcano. She did not scream. She did not weep. She sat on the painted table, staring at the map of Westeros, and she began to plan, not for a kingdom, for a funeral, for a reckoning. The young woman who had once loved her sister wife, who had yearned for her father's approval, who had tried to maintain the dream of a unified realm. She died that night too. What remained was the Queen, the Black Queen, who now demanded blood. It was a debt that could only be paid in fire and blood. The realm of Westeros had seen wars before. It had seen usurpations and rebellions, but it had never seen this. The dragons had been the Targaryens' glory, their symbol of divine right. Now, they would become the instruments of the family's near-total ruin. The dance had truly begun. The signal was given. Armies stirred across the realm, and the Targaryens, masters of the world, turned their beautiful, terrible weapons upon each other. In the first year of the war, the blood price would be catastrophic. Rhaenyra held the east, the north and the Iron Islands. Aegon held the west, the Reach and the Stormlands. There would be battles at Riverrun, at the Honeywine, at Rook's Rest. There would be feasts of betrayal and famine of loyalty. And there would be the deaths of dragons. So many dragons. But the war that began with the murder of a boy over a stormy sea was not destined to end quickly. It would burn with an intensity that would leave the ruling house forever scarred. And when the fire finally died, the family that had ruled from the Iron Throne for over a century would be reduced to shadows of their former glory. The Age of Dragons was ending. The Targaryens who survived the storm were not the same people who had entered it. A king would sit the throne, a child king, a boy who had seen his mother die and his family consume itself, and the very nature of Targaryen rule would change forever. News of Viserys I's death spread like a crack through ice, splitting the realm not into loyalists and rebels, but into two rival royal courts. In King's Landing, the Greens crowned Aegon II beneath the Dragon Pit's dome. On Dragonstone, Rhaenyra answered her father's decree and placed the crown upon her own brow. The realm split in two as brother fought. Brother and dragon clashed with dragon in the devastating civil war, now known as the Dance of the Dragons. Every lord was forced to choose a side, and those who tried to remain neutral quickly learned that fire cares nothing for indecision. The first blows were struck, not by armies, but by dragon riders. Rhaenyra sent her sons to rally the great houses. Her second son, Lucerys, flew to Storm's End on his young dragon Arrax. There he met Aemon Targaryen on the massive dragon Vhagar. A confrontation in the stormy skies ended with Aemon losing control, and Vhagar devouring both Lucerys and Arrax in an instant. The war had claimed its first royal blood. Rhaenyra was shattered by the news. In her grief, she did not call for a formal execution. She called for revenge. Daemon Targaryen, her husband and prince consort, saw an opportunity to strike at the heart of the Greens, not on a battlefield, but in a bedchamber. He recruited 2 men from the gutters of King's Landing, a former city guard known as Blood, and a rat catcher known as Cheese. Their mission was to infiltrate the Red Keep and capture Aegon II's heir. They failed in their capture. Instead, they forced their way into the chambers of Queen Helena and her children. They made the queen choose which of her sons would die. She offered herself, but they refused. They killed the younger boy, the 6-year-old Prince Jaehaerys, right in front of his mother. The brutal assassination of Aegon II's young heir by the Assassins. Blood and Cheese escalated the conflict from a political war of succession into a war of total annihilation. There would be no mercy now, no hostages, no peace terms, only fire and blood. The war spread across the Riverlands and the Reach, consuming castles and towns in Dragonflame. But the first great pitched battle between the primary armies of the Blacks and Greens would not be fought on the ground, but in the skies. Lord Staunton of Rook's Rest called for Rhaenyra's aid. The Blacks answered with Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, mounted on the great red she-dragon Melis. The Greens had set a trap. King Aegon II himself flew from King's Landing on his golden dragon Sunfire, alongside his brother Aemond on Vargar. When Rhaenys descended upon the army besieging the castle, the 2 brothers ambushed her. The dragon battle at Rook's Rest remains one of the most terrible events in the history of Westeros. 3 dragons clashed in a storm of fire and steel, but Aemond waited. He let Aegon engage Melis first. Sunfire and Melis tore at each other before Vargar joined the fight. The Battle of Rook's Rest left King Aegon II horribly burned and crippled. Sunfire was maimed nearly to death, and Rhaenys and Melis were killed outright. Aemond, now the undisputed master of the largest living dragon in the world, flew back to King's Landing and declared himself Prince Regent. His brother was bedridden, broken, and screaming in a bath of milk of the poppy. The throne of the Greens was now held by a one-eyed prince, with a dragon the size of a castle, and no restraint at all. Aemond's regency would turn the war into a brutal, scorched earth campaign. He burned the Riverlands from end to end, pushing the realm deeper into ruin. Every dragon battle, every death made the dynasty weaker. The dance of the dragons was far from over. The realm was bleeding out, and the throne in King's Landing had never felt colder. The fire that had once forged the 7 kingdoms was now consuming them from within, leaving only ash and a legacy of grief. With the Greens holding the largest dragon and the capital's military might, Rhaenyra and her council on Dragonstone realized they needed more than just armies. They needed more riders for their masterless dragons. Prince Jaehaerys issued a call across the island of Dragonstone, promising land, knighthood and wealth to any man of Targaryen blood who could master one of the wild or riderless beasts nesting on the Dragonmont. This desperate search, known to history as the sowing of the seeds, brought forward bastards, small folk and adventurers. Many met their end in torrents of dragonflame, but a few succeeded. Hugh Hammer claimed the mighty Vermithor. Ulf the White-tamed Silverwing, Adam of Hull bonded with Seasmoke, and a young woman named Nettles won over the wild dragon Sheepstealer. This sudden increase in dragon riders shifted the balance of power back to the Blacks, but the cost of victory would soon be paid in tragedy. The Triarchy, allied with the Greens, sent a massive fleet to break the Velaryon blockade. The resulting Battle of the Gullet was one of the bloodiest sea battles in history. Though the Blacks ultimately turned back the fleet, they lost Prince Jaehaerys and his dragon Vermax. The grief of losing another son hardened Rhaenyra's resolve. She would no longer hide on her island fortress. With Aemond and Criston Cole marching north to deal with Daemon, King's Landing was left virtually undefended. Seizing the moment, Rhaenyra and Daemon descended upon the capital with their remaining dragons. The city fell in less than a day. Rhaenyra finally ascended the steps of the Red Keep and took her seat upon the Iron Throne, but her triumph was bittersweet. The throne itself seemed to reject her, cutting her hands as she grasped the cold steel, a dark omen of the bitter struggle still to come. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. The brutal assassination of Aegon II's young heir by the assassins, Blood and Cheese, had escalated the civil conflict into a war of total annihilation. From that moment, no mercy would be shown on either side. Rhaenyra, fueled by the momentum of her allies and the sheer force of her claim, decided the time had come to seize the capital itself. King's Landing in those days was a city on the brink of starvation. The blockade of the Gullet had cut off its trade. The treasury of the Greens was empty. When the Gold Cloaks opened the gates to Rhaenyra's forces, there was little fight left in the defenders. Her brother Aegon II, betrayed by his own city watch and abandoned by his protectors, fled the Red Keep through a secret tunnel that led to the river, leaving his crown behind him in his haste. Rhaenyra entered her father's city in triumph, and she finally sat the Iron Throne. It was a victory 6 years in the making, the fulfillment of the oath sworn by every lord in the realm. But the triumph was hollow from the first moment. The treasury was bare, the city was starving. Her own supporters in the council were squabbling over titles and lands she could not grant, and the memory of her dead son Lucerys hung over every decision she made. Consumed by grief and a deep, gnawing paranoia, Rhaenyra did not know who she could trust. Every shadow in the Red Keep seemed to hide a green assassin. Every noble who bent the knee seemed to be hiding a knife behind their back. To fund her reign and to pay for the continued war against the remaining green loyalists in the Reach and the Stormlands, Rhaenyra turned heavily to taxation. She demanded the small folk of King's Landing surrender their last stores of grain and their last copper pennies. She squeezed the city dry to fill a treasury that had been emptied by war and mismanagement. The people who had opened their gates to her, who had cheered her as the realm's delight, were now forced to watch their children starve while the castle feasted. The love of the crowd curdled into a deep, simmering resentment. Songs were replaced by bitter whispers in the streets. This anger needed a target, and it found one in the very source of Targaryen power. A fanatical septon, known only as the Shepherd, began preaching in the streets of Flea Bottom. He stood on barrels and overturned carts, pointing a trembling finger toward the great dome of the dragon pit. He called the dragons demons. He told the starving masses that the war, the famine, the death of their children was divine punishment for serving the whore of Dragonstone and her brood of monsters. The city was a powder keg, soaked in blood and hunger, and the Shepherd lit the fuse. The mob moved on the dragon pit in a frenzied tide. They came with torches and hammers and sharpened pieces of scrap metal. They came to tear down the gods who had abandoned them. Inside the great bronze doors of the dragon pit, chained to the walls of the cavernous lair, were 5 of the most magnificent creatures the world had ever seen. Dreamfire, the graceful Blue Queen, who had once carried Queen Helena; Tyraxes, the dragon of Rhaenyra's young son Joffrey; Shrykos and Morgul, 2 young dragons who had not yet bonded with a rider and were kept deep within the pit; and Syrax, Rhaenyra's own golden she-dragon, who had been the most beloved dragon in the realm for decades. The scene inside the pit was one of absolute madness. The mob smashed through the great doors, flooding into the darkness. The dragons fought with everything they had. Their fire melted stone. Their claws cut through armor and flesh alike. 100 men died in the first wave, burned to cinders or crushed beneath falling columns. But the mob was a tide without end. They climbed over the bodies of their dead. They drove spears into the bellies of the beasts. They poured oil and set them ablaze. One by one, the great winged tyrants of the world were brought down. Tyraxes was pinned by a falling section of the dome and hacked apart. Morgul was surrounded and butchered in its lair. Shrykos was pulled down by sheer numbers and drowned in a pit of human rage. Dreamfire broke her chains in a desperate fury and killed hundreds. But she was overwhelmed and pierced by 1,000 blades. And when Syrax, hearing the roars of the dying, flew down from the sky to try and save them, she was dragged from the air by the mob and torn apart in the streets outside the pit. When it was over, the roar of dragons was gone forever. The dragon pit collapsed into a smoking ruin. 5 dragons lay dead in the ash and rubble. The greatest military asset the Targaryen dynasty had ever possessed was extinguished in a single afternoon of pure, spontaneous hatred. With her dragons dead, and the city in open rebellion against her, Rhaenyra's support crumbled into nothing. She could not command the loyalty of a starving mob. She could barely command the loyalty of her own household. Realizing that the capital was lost, she made the desperate decision to flee. She gathered her remaining son and a handful of loyalists, bought passage on a small ship, and sailed for the one place she thought she could trust. She sailed for Dragonstone, the island fortress of her birth, the seat of her house. She did not know that her brother Aegon II had survived his flight. He had made his way across the narrow sea, gathered what strength he could, and flown to Dragonstone on his dragon Sunfire. He had made a pact with the castle garrison, promising them lands and pardons if they delivered his sister into his hands. Rhaenyra sailed into a perfect trap. She landed on the rocky shore of Dragonstone, expecting sanctuary. Instead, she was seized the moment she stepped onto the dock. She was brought before her brother, Aegon II, his body broken and scarred from his own battles, but his spirit sharp with vengeance, showed her no mercy. He did not give her the dignity of the sword. She was fed to his dragon, Sunfire, who devoured her alive while her son watched. The war for the throne had ended in the most terrible way imaginable, with the rightful queen consumed by the very fire that had once made her family invincible. The dance of the dragons was over. The realm was in ruins. The great houses had bled themselves white. The fields were salted, the city starving, and the dragons were dead. Aegon II had won the crown, but his victory was hollow. He ruled over an empty kingdom, and his own reign would be brief and bitter. The crown passed to Rhaenyra's son, a boy who had seen his mother devoured by a dragon, a boy whose entire world had collapsed into fire and ash. He inherited a dynasty that had lost its teeth, a dynasty that had destroyed its most powerful weapon in a fit of civil war. The age of absolute power, of fire and blood unchallenged, was gone. The Targaryen kings who followed would have to rule without dragons, and the throne they sat would grow weaker with every passing generation. The long decline had begun. The fall of the dragon pit was a wound that bled the life from Rhaenyra's reign. The common folk of King's Landing had turned on her, howling for her blood, and in their panic and rage, they had destroyed the very source of Targaryen military dominance. 5 dragons, creatures of legend bound to a single family, torn apart by a mob armed with pitchforks and stones. Rhaenyra, who had sailed into the capital as a triumphant queen, now found herself trapped in a city that hated her, ruling over ashes. With her hold on King's Landing crumbling and her treasury empty, she knew she could not stay. She fled the city in secret, taking what little remained of her court back to Dragonstone, the very fortress where the war had begun. But Aegon, though crippled and scarred from his fall at Rook's Rest, had not abandoned the fight. Through whispers and shadows, his supporters had retaken Dragonstone in his name. When Rhaenyra's ship arrived at the island, she was walking directly into a trap. She was seized by the garrison, dragged in chains before her brother. Aegon II sat slumped in his chair, fragmented by his injuries. But he was the victor. He had achieved what he had always wanted. Not just the throne, not just the crown, but the complete and utter subjugation of his rival. The vengeance Aegon exacted was absolute, designed as a final gesture of terror. He did not quietly execute his half-sister. He brought her before Sunfire, his own dragon. Sunfire had been grievously wounded in the war, burned and broken, but he could still move, and he could still hunger. Aegon forced Rhaenyra's own young son, Aegon the Younger, to watch as Sunfire consumed her. The boy, barely 10 years old, was made to stand by, and witness his mother devoured in the dragon pit of Dragonstone. It was an act of such profound cruelty that it soured any notion of righteous victory from the moment it occurred, a permanent stain on the crown Aegon had fought so viciously to claim. For a very short time, Aegon II was the undisputed king of the Seven Kingdoms. His rival was dead, her faction in disarray, but the realm was far from at peace. The war had not ended, it had merely shifted. A massive northern army, thousands strong, was marching south under the command of Cregan Stark. The young lords of the Riverlands, known as the Lads, were burning with a desire for revenge, and they were winning every battle they fought against the remaining Green forces. King's Landing itself was a starving, ravaged city, and the nobles who had fought for Aegon began to see the writing clearly written on the wall. Their king was a crippled, paranoid tyrant whose mind had broken alongside his body. Continuing the war meant an inevitable sack of their city. The men who had crowned him, the very architects of the Green Council, decided that the king they had created had to be destroyed. Larys Strong, the Lord Confessor, a spider who had woven so much of this bloodshed, arranged for Aegon's murder. Aegon II was poisoned in his own bed, a quiet and inglorious end for a king who had presided over such immense fire and fury. His reign had lasted barely 2 years. With Aegon dead and no other viable Green claimant, the path was finally clear for the Blacks. There was only one legitimate Targaryen male left, who could unite the warring factions and end the bloodshed. Aegon the Younger, Rhaenyra's son. He was 11 years old, a traumatized boy who had just watched his mother fed to a dragon. He was crowned King Aegon III in the Great Sept of Baelor. Cregan Stark arrived in the capital to find the war already won by his allies. He served as Hand of the King for precisely 1 day, overseeing the judgment of those who had broken their oaths in what became known as the Hour of the Wolf. The cost of the dance was immeasurable. The Targaryen dynasty was severely depleted. The family was fractured. The dragons were all dead. The treasury was bankrupt. A broken child sat the Iron Throne, surrounded by regents who deeply distrusted each other, tasked with ruling a kingdom that had completely torn itself apart. The dance of the dragons was over, but the scars it left on the dynasty would never fully heal. The reign of Aegon III, the Dragonbane, would be defined not by conquest or glory, but by the slow, painful work of rebuilding a shattered realm. The dragons were gone. The treasury was empty. The confidence of the lords in the Iron Throne was shattered. A long grey twilight had settled heavily over the House of the Dragon. The boy who took the Iron Throne was a ghost. Aegon III, son of Rhaenyra, was not a conqueror emerging from a triumphant war. He was a survivor crawling out of a mass grave. At the age of 10, he had been forced to kneel and witness his mother be devoured alive by his uncle's dragon. The image never left him. He flinched at fire. He refused to ride a dragon. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was with a flat, hollow voice that betrayed no emotion. His court was not a place of celebration. It was a realm of shadows, a somber court haunted by the memories of his mother's brutal death. The throne room echoed not with laughter, but with the silent weight of so many dead. The first order of business was justice, or what passed for it after a war of betrayals. Lord Cregan Stark of Winterfell marched south to settle the accounts of the dance. For a brief window, the Regency Council feared the North itself might seize the crown outright. Instead, Cregan presided over a swift, brutal purge of those who had poisoned Aegon II and betrayed the crown, an event history remembers as the Hour of the Wolf. And then, just as swiftly as he had come, he left. He saw a boy king fractured by the past and a realm exhausted by grief. Cregan Stark handed the regency to a council of weary lords and returned to the north, leaving the king to the slow, grinding work of reconstruction. No song was sung for the last dragon. It was born in the dragon pit, a sickly, stunted thing, barely the size of a hunting hound. It did not roar. It did not fly far. It lived a short, miserable life, a pathetic echo of the beasts that once blackened the sky. When it died, It did so silently on a grey day that no chronicler thought to mark. No one even recorded the exact date, but its death became the defining wound of Aegon III's reign. The last living dragon had died. Without it, the Targaryens were left, without the magical beasts that had secured their empire. The dynasty that Aegon the Conqueror had built on fire and blood now rested entirely on the frail shoulders of a depressed king. Without the terror of dragons, Aegon III ruled through pure persistence. He was cold, he was efficient, he was utterly devoid of charisma, and yet that precise absence of fire is exactly what the realm required. He did not dream of conquest like his ancestors. He thought about roads and tolls and trade routes. He balanced the books. He rebuilt the treasury. He focused on rebuilding the ruined economy and infrastructure of Westeros. Ruling with cold, duty-bound efficiency, he maintained a strict neutrality in the petty conflicts of the lords. He ruled not as a dragon, but as a caretaker of a broken house. His personal life was marked by tragedy. His first queen, Rhaenyra, died young, a likely suicide, severing the only remaining thread of unity between the rival branches of the family. But he found a measure of peace with his second wife, Rhaenyra Velaryon, a girl who had a smile that could, for a moment, cut through the gloom of his court. His children were his only visible joy, and into them he poured whatever fragile hopes he had left. When Aegon III died at just 36, worn down by a lifetime of sorrow and the sheer weight of duty, he left behind a kingdom that was stable, if fragile. He left behind a dynasty that was secure, if utterly diminished. He left behind sons. The eldest Daeron was a boy of 14, handsome, bold, and feverishly eager for glory. Daeron looked at the history of his house and saw only the conquest. He was tired of grey peace. He wanted fire. The realm was about to find out what happens when a young dragon wakes up hungry. Daeron I ascended the Iron Throne, and almost immediately, he set his eyes on the one prize that had eluded even Aegon the Conqueror, Dawn. The lords of his small council protested. They pointed out that the dragons were dead, and that without those winged nightmares, any attempt to subdue the desert sands would end in disaster. But the young king was not to be deterred. He famously told his advisors that they had a dragon, and that it stood right before them. He was only 14, yet he possessed a military mind that rivaled the greatest generals in history. Daeron did not rely on brute force. He relied on brilliant, unexpected strategy. He split his forces into 3 prongs. Lord Alyn Velaryon, the Oakenfist, led a massive fleet to break the Dornish at the Planky Town, while Daeron himself led the main army down the treacherous pass of the Boneway, guided by paths that others deemed impassable. Against all odds, the boy king succeeded where the conquerors of old had failed. Within a year, the Prince of Dawn knelt, and the Red Son of Dawn bowed to the 3-headed dragon. It was a triumph that stunned the known world. Daeron wrote a book about his campaign, cementing his legacy not just as a conqueror, but as a scholar of war. But the sands of Dawn are notoriously difficult to hold. The Dornish did not stay conquered for long. A fierce rebellion sparked, ignited by the assassination of the king's governor, Lord Lionel Tyrell, who was murdered in his bed by a cascade of scorpions. Daeron returned to the south to put down the uprising, that the desert was a cruel enemy. In the end, it was not open battle that claimed the young dragon, but treachery. Under a banner of peace during negotiations, Daeron was betrayed and cut down. He died at the age of 18, holding his sword Blackfire, surrounded by his enemies. His reign was short, a brief, blinding flash of gold and crimson that left the realm once again mourning a young king. In his place rose his brother Baelor, a boy of a completely different nature. Where Daeron wanted war, Baelor wanted peace. Where Daeron saw glory in blood, Baelor saw salvation in prayer. The realm had survived the somber silence of Aegon III and the burning ambition of the young dragon. But it was now about to face the reign of a king who looked not to the earth, but to the heavens. Aegon III, the Dragonbane, ruled a kingdom that had been emptied of its ancient fire. The last dragon had withered and died in his cradle. a tiny twisted thing that no one wanted to speak of. The Targaryens were still kings, but they were merely men, now bound to the earth like everyone else. When Aegon III finally passed away after 26 years of rule, the crown passed to his eldest son. The boy was 14 years old. His name was Daeron. He refused to accept a diminished inheritance. Daeron looked at the map of Dorne and saw a wound that had never healed. His great ancestor, Aegon the Conqueror, had tried to claim the southern sands and failed. The Dornish had resisted every dragon that came their way, burning the fields and hiding in the deserts. The Targaryens had never truly forgiven Dorne for its defiance. The realm was incomplete. Daeron I decided he would be the one to finish what the Conqueror started. He was young, bold, and utterly fearless. He began preparing for war the moment he took the crown. He gathered a fleet at the mouth of the Blackwater, building ships and staging a massive naval presence. The Dornish saw the fleet and prepared for an invasion from the sea. Just like all the ones that came before, they made ready to burn the Targaryen ships and slaughter the men on the beaches. But Daeron was not his ancestor. He had studied the old wars and learned from every defeat. The fleet was a feint. While the Dornish lords watched the sea, Daeron led his army south through the deserts and passes of the Red Mountains. He struck through the Boneway and the Prince's Pass at the same time, splitting the Dornish defences. The young dragon moved faster than anyone expected, hitting the Dornish from their own landward flank. The Dornish lords rushed to meet him, but they were too slow, too scattered. Daeron took the great castle of Sunspear and accepted the surrender of the Prince of Dawn. It was done. Daeron I, the young dragon, had achieved what Aegon the Conqueror could not. He had conquered Dawn. He was 14 years old. The realm celebrated the young king. He wrote a history of his conquest, the first book ever written by a king of the Seven Kingdoms. He was the perfect Targaryen king, handsome, brilliant, fierce, and victorious. But the conquest was built on sand. The Dornish did not accept their defeat. They rose in rebellion, ambushing Targaryen patrols, poisoning the wells, and killing the lords Daeron appointed to rule them. The young dragon tried to hold what he had won, but Dawn bled him dry. At the age of 18, Daeron I rode out to meet with the Dornish lords one last time. They had asked for a parley under a banner of peace. It was the most sacred custom in the Seven Kingdoms, a guarantee that no violence would take place while terms were discussed. The young dragon trusted the truce. He rode into the field with his closest knights and lords. The Dornish came to the meeting with hidden weapons. They fell upon the young dragon and his companions, butchering them in a single brutal act of betrayal. Daeron I was dead before he hit the ground. He was 18 years old. The body of the young dragon was returned to King's Landing in a simple cart. The conquest of Dorne was over. The kingdom of the Targaryens was broken again. The crown passed to his brother, who had seen the ambition of his sibling end in such ugly betrayal. Daeron I remains a legend, the boy king who conquered a nation and died for its defiance. He proved that the Targaryens could still achieve greatness without dragons. But he also proved that greatness is fragile. The new king had no taste for war. He turned his eyes to the Sept and to the gods, seeking a different kind of power entirely. This new king was Baelor, the second son of Aegon III, and history would remember him as the Blessed, where his brother Daeron had brought fire and steel to Dorne. Baelor brought forgiveness and prayer. His first act as king was not to seek revenge for his brother's murder, but to release the Dornish hostages that had been brought to King's Landing. He did not send them back in chains. Instead, Baelor walked them home himself. He travelled on foot, barefoot, and dressed in the simple rough robes of a penitent, all the way from the Crownlands to the far deserts of Sunspear. It was a journey of more than 1,000 miles, a feat of endurance that many believed would kill him. But Baelor survived, and his display of extreme humility did what Daeron's armies never could. It softened the hearts of the Dornish. He forged a peace with the Prince of Dawn, sealed by a betrothal between his cousin Darren and Princess Maria Martell. Yet Baelor's devotion was not merely a political tool. It was a madness that consumed him. Upon his return, he rescued his cousin, Aemon the Dragon Knight, who was held in a cage suspended over a pit of venomous vipers. Baelor walked into the pit, trusting in the Seven to protect him. He was bitten dozens of times, and of those he survived, the venom changed him forever, leaving his mind fractured and his spirit completely detached from the mortal world. He locked his own 3 sisters away in a tall, comfortable prison that became known as the Maidenville. Claiming he wished to preserve their purity and prevent his court from falling into lustful temptation, he began construction on a massive, domed sept atop Visenya's hill, a monument to his faith that would take decades to complete. As the years passed, his fasts grew longer and his visions more intense. He outlawed prostitution, attempted to replace the ravens of the citadel with doves, and eventually starved himself to death in a final desperate attempt to cleanse his soul of earthly sins. He ruled for 10 years, leaving behind a kingdom at peace but a treasury entirely empty, and a court that whispered he had been more septon than king. The young dragon's triumph in dawn was a flash of lightning, brilliant and brief. Daeron I died in the sand at 18, murdered under a banner of truce, betrayed by the very people he had conquered. It was a bitter ending to a glorious reign, and it left the Iron Throne to a brother who was his complete opposite. Where Daeron was a warrior, Baelor was a septon. Where Daeron was ambitious for the realm, Baelor was ambitious only for the gods. Baelor I must have seemed a strange king to the lords of Westeros. He had been raised in the faith of the Seven, had read the 7-pointed star more often than the histories of war, and he wore the crown reluctantly, as a duty rather than a prize. Almost immediately, Baelor faced the defining crisis of his kingship. His cousin and beloved knight of the Kingsguard, Aemon the Dragon Knight, had been captured by the Dornish. They demanded a ransom. Baelor did what no king had ever done. He shed his crown, his boots, and his royal raiment. He walked barefoot into Dorne, across the burning sands, to beg for Aemon's freedom. The Dornish, expecting a warrior, met a penitent. They were so struck by his devotion, or perhaps so impressed by his willingness to humble himself, that they released the knight. In that single absurd act, Baelor achieved what Daeron's armies could not. He forged a lasting peace with Dorne. The treaty signed, the bones of Daeron I finally returned home, and the kingdom was made truly whole. But the cost was a king who saw the world through a lens of prayer and prophecy, not politics. Baelor's piety had a darker edge. He was terrified of sin, specifically the sin of the flesh. He had 3 sisters, Daena, Rhaena, and Elena, the daughters of Aegon III. Baelor, fearing the temptation they represented and the potential for dynastic conflict, did something unprecedented. He ordered the construction of a set of rooms in the Red Keep, known as the Maiden Vault, and there he locked his 3 sisters away. They were prisoners in all but name. The king reasoned he was protecting their virtue and his own soul. Instead, he bred a deep and bitter resentment within his own house. Daena, the most spirited of them, fought against her confinement with every tool she had and would later earn the name Daena the Defiant. The court watched in uneasy silence as the king imprisoned the future of the Targaryen line, all in the name of holiness. Baelor's reign devolved further into ascetic extremes. He fasted for days, flagellated himself, and filled the court with septons and scepters. His obsession with religious purity became a dangerous mania. Finally, in the year 171 after Conquest, the king undertook a prolonged fast that his body could not endure. He starved himself to death. Baelor the Blessed forced his soul from his body through sheer force of will, leaving behind an incredible legacy and a fractured realm. He had built the foundations for the Great Sept of Baelor, the grandest structure in all of King's Landing, a monument to his faith. But he had also left the Iron Throne without a direct heir, his sisters locked away, his court confused, and divided between those who revered him as a saint and those who considered him dangerously unfit to rule. He was the blessed and the mad, a king who saved the realm from war through his holiness and damned it to chaos through his obsessions. With Baelor's death, the crown passed to his uncle, Viserys II. Viserys was the quiet constant of the dynasty. He had been the true architect of the realm for decades, the hand of the king to Daeron and Baelor, the one who actually made the kingdom run. A man of immense competence and quiet authority, but his time on the throne was tragically short, barely a single year. Viserys died of a sudden illness, leaving the Iron Throne to his eldest son, a prince whose name would become synonymous with excess, cruelty, and the utter ruin of the peace that Baelor and the wise Viserys had carefully constructed. The quiet order of a kingdom, unified by piety and governance, was about to shatter under the weight of terrible appetites. Baelor the Blessed had locked his sisters away, built a kingdom of prayer, and starved himself in the name of faith. When his body broke under the weight of his own piety, the throne sat empty for a breath. But the realm did not wait long. It passed, not to a holy fool or a warrior child, but to the man who had been holding the realm together for decades, Viserys II. He was the uncle, the administrator, the one who balanced the books, while his nephews played at being kings. Aegon III was too traumatized by the dance. Daeron I was too busy conquering Dawn. Baelor I was too busy praying, and through it all, Viserys was there. He served faithfully as hand of the king to his nephews for decades, never demanding the crown, never reaching for it, until it was the only option left. And so, in the year 171 AC, Viserys II finally ascended the Iron Throne. He was not young, he was not dashing, he was experienced, and he knew exactly what the realm needed. He knew that the crown could not afford another crusade, another religious schism, another war. It needed stability. His reign was desperately brief, a single year, but it was not wasted. Viserys introduced vital administrative reforms for the royal treasury and legal system. He was building the house from the foundation up. He stabilized the currency. He rooted out the corruption that had festered in the courts. During the long years of inattentive kings, he gave the lords of Westeros a king who ruled by precedent and law, not by madness or whim. It was the most competent governance the realm had seen since the days of Aerys I. It was the calmest the Red Keep had felt in a century, but the calm was not to last. Viserys died suddenly after only a year on the throne. The suddenness of it shocked the court. One day he was working at his desk, the next he was gone. And because the Targaryen court was what it was, the whispers began immediately. Poison, his son, his ambitious son, Aegon, who was everything his father was not, indulgent, charismatic, deeply impatient, was suspected of the worst. The rumours spread from the kitchens to the streets of King's Landing. The prince had poisoned his father to seize the power he could not wait to hold. These rumours were nothing more than whispers, shadows in the torchlight. No maester ever confirmed it. No witness ever came forward. But truth in a royal court is often less important than the story the people choose to believe. And the story of Viserys II was that the hand who had finally ruled was removed by the son who wanted to rule without restraint. The crown passed. The careful administrator was gone. In his place came a king who would burn the legacy his father had built, not with dragonfire, but with indulgence and excess. The seeds of the next great conflict were sown in the very moment of Viserys' passing. The era of quiet competence was over. The era of spectacular chaos was about to begin. Aegon IV would go down in history as the unworthy. He was a man of vast appetites, whose greed, lust and vanity knew no bounds. Where his father Viserys had spent his life saving every penny and reinforcing the laws of the land, Aegon spent his life wasting those pennies and bending those laws to suit his whims. He took what he wanted when he wanted it, and he cared nothing for the consequences. He filled his court with flatterers, sycophants, and beautiful women, turning the Red Keep from a seat of sober governance into a palace of endless, decadent sin. He had no interest in the tedious business of ruling. He left the treasury to rot, sold offices to the highest bidder, and took countless mistresses, fathering bastards, across the length and breadth of the 7 kingdoms. To Aegon, the realm was not a responsibility to be stewarded, but a toy to be broken. His legitimate queen, Aerys, was a pious and fragile woman who suffered greatly under his cruelty. Finding comfort only in her brother, Aemon the Dragon Knight, the legendary Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, the rumours of their forbidden love tormented the king, fueling a deep and bitter hatred for his own trueborn son and heir, Daeron. Aegon favoured his bastards instead, showering them with gifts, land and titles. Among them was Daemon Waters, a boy of unmatched beauty and martial skill, whom the king gifted Blackfire, the ancestral Valyrian steel sword of Aegon the Conqueror. It was a gesture that sent shockwaves through the realm, a symbolic passing of the torch that bypassed the scholarly Daeron in favour of a warrior bastard. As the years wore on, Aegon's excesses caught up with him. The once handsome prince became a bloated, diseased mountain of flesh, unable to walk, let alone ride. Yet even on his deathbed, his capacity for malice did not falter. In one final, catastrophic act of spite against his trueborn heir, Aegon the Unworthy signed a decree that would tear the realm apart for generations. He legitimized all of his bastards. With a single stroke of a quill, the dying king elevated his baseborn children, the great bastards, to the same status as his trueborn son. He did not just invite chaos, he commanded it. He set brother against brother, house against house, and planted the seeds for the Blackfire rebellions, a series of devastating civil wars that would bleed the Targaryen dynasty for nearly a century. The crown that Viserys II had worked so hard to protect was now balanced on the edge of a sword, ready to plunge the 7 kingdoms back into the fire. Viserys II had been a steady hand that the monarchy desperately needed after the chaos of the Conquest of Dawn and the strange piety of Baelor the Blessed. He ruled for barely a single year, but in that time he straightened the accounts and tightened the laws. But Viserys was old when he finally took the crown, and his reign ended before it could truly begin. He left behind a stable realm, a full treasury, and a son who would undo it all within a decade. Aegon IV was crowned in the 172nd year after the conquest, and the realm had no idea what was about to wash over it. Aegon IV earned his title as the worst king in Westerosi history through extreme corruption, greed, and gluttony. Where his father had been a hand that built, Aegon was a mouth that consumed. He saw the Iron Throne not as a seat of responsibility, but as a license to indulge every whim. The court of the Red Keep transformed from a place of governance into a circus of debauchery. Favourites rose and fell, based on how well they could amuse the king, not on their ability to govern. The Kingsguard became a collection of cronies, the small council a gathering of sycophants. Any man who spoke of thrift or duty was cast out. The age of the unworthy had begun. The king bankrupts the royal treasury to bestow gifts upon his numerous mistresses and corrupt favourites. This was not the slow decay of a negligent ruler. It was a violent explosion of state-sanctioned theft. Aegon created a new order of knighthood, the Order of the Dragon's Tail, purely to reward his most loyal supporters with lands and incomes that belonged to the crown. His mistresses were granted castles and lordships. Barbara Bracken, Melissa Blackwood, and countless others were elevated to positions of immense power simply because they had caught the king's eye. The dragon's hoard, accumulated over centuries, was scattered to the winds in a matter of years. Taxes were raised to the point of desperation in the crownlands. But the silver never reached the realm. It disappeared into the pockets of the king's favourites and the stomach of the king himself. Aegon's gluttony was a sickness. He grew immensely fat, barely able to walk, and yet the feasts never stopped. The kitchens of the Red Keep worked constantly to satisfy his appetite for rich foods and strong wines. He dressed in the finest silks and velvets, dripping in gold and jewels, a grotesque figure of excess. He openly mocked the gods and the faith, surrounding himself with maesters and sorcerers, who told him what he wanted to hear. His court was a place where loyalty meant nothing, and pleasure meant everything. The great lords of Westeros watched from afar as the Targaryen monarchy sank into a mire of corruption. They saw a king who cared nothing for the realm, and they began to wonder if the dragon had finally lost its fire. Among the many children of his appetites, the most prominent was Daemon Waters, the son of his cousin, Dana the Defiant. Daemon was beautiful and skilled, a true-born Targaryen in appearance if not in law. Aegon adored Daemon, raising him at court and giving him every advantage. The final and most inflammatory gift came when the king bestowed upon Daemon the sword of Aegon the Conqueror himself, the Valyrian steel blade Blackfire. Giving a bastard the Conqueror's sword was a deliberate insult to the king's own true-born heir, Daeron. It was a public pronouncement that the king valued the bastard over the prince. This act planted a seed of chaos in the soil of the realm. By the end of his reign, Aegon was a ruin of a man, rotting from the inside, confined to his bed. His hatred for his son Daeron had only grown. He spread lies that Daeron was the son of the Dragon Knights, his own brother, a slander that undermined the very legitimacy of Daeron's claim. As death approached, Aegon's malice focused into a single final act. On his deathbed, Aegon IV legitimizes all of his bastard children, setting the stage for generations of bloody civil war. With his own hand, he signed the decree, granting Daemon Waters and all his other bastards the full legal rights of Targaryen princes. Daemon Waters became Daemon Blackfire. The realm now had a rival king, armed with the symbol of the dynasty and armed with the law. The great bastards were now a threat to the Iron Throne. The Blackfire name was born in the dying breath of a bitter king. The realm did not have to wait long for the fire to catch. The wars of the Blackfire pretenders would tear the Seven Kingdoms apart. A direct inheritance from the Unworthy King, Daeron II inherited a crown tarnished by his father's corruption and challenged by his father's bastards. The Targaryen dynasty had endured the dance of the dragons, the loss of their dragons, and the madness of Baelor. Now they faced a wound that came from within, a war of succession that would test the very bonds of blood and family. The age of the Unworthy King was over, but his shadow was long. When Aegon IV finally died, in 184 AC, he left behind a kingdom that was poorer, more corrupt, and far more divided than the one he had inherited. The royal treasury was drained, the court was riddled with sycophants, and the realm's confidence in the crown had been badly shaken. But from this wreckage, a new king emerged, one who would restore a measure of dignity and purpose to the Iron Throne. Daeron II was the son of Aegon IV, but he could not have been more different from his father. Where Aegon had been gluttonous and cruel, Daeron was thoughtful and diplomatic. He surrounded himself with scholars and maesters, and he devoted himself to the arts of governance rather than the pleasures of the flesh. It was this temperament that earned him the title Daeron the Good. His greatest achievement came in the form of a peaceful revolution. For centuries, Dorne had remained independent, a stubborn holdout that had resisted every attempt at conquest. From Aegon the Conqueror to the Young Dragon, Daeron the Good accomplished what none of his ancestors had managed. He brought Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms, not through fire and blood, but through marriage alliances. He wed the Dornish princess Miriam Martell, and he gave his sister Daenerys in marriage to the Prince of Dorne. These unions sealed a treaty that integrated Dorne fully into the realm, with the Martells retaining their titles and privileges. It was a masterstroke of statecraft, and it brought peace and prosperity to a region that had known only war. But it also sowed the seeds of resentment. The Dornish brought with them their customs, their fashions, and their influence at court, and this did not sit well with the traditionalist lords of the other kingdoms. They saw the Dornish as soft and foreign, and they viewed the king's preference for diplomacy over warfare as a weakness. These disaffected lords found a champion in the king's half-brother, Daemon Blackfire. Daemon was the bastard son of Aegon IV, but he had been legitimized on his father's deathbed. More importantly, Aegon had bestowed upon him the ancestral Targaryen sword, Blackfire, the very blade that Aegon the Conqueror had carried during his conquest of Westeros. To many, this was a clear signal that Daemon was meant to be king. He was everything that Daeron was not. A warrior, a leader on the battlefield, a man who embodied the martial traditions that the Targaryens had once represented. And so in 196 AC, Daemon Blackfire raised his banner. He claimed the sword Blackfire as his birthright and declared himself the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. The realm split in two. On one side stood the Red Dragon of House Targaryen, loyal to Daeron. On the other stood the Black Dragon of House Blackfire, the new sigil that Daemon adopted for his followers. The first Blackfire rebellion had begun. It was a war that consumed the realm for more than a year. Battles were fought across the Reach and the Riverlands, and the blood of both great houses soaked the earth. Daemon Blackfire proved himself a formidable commander, and he came close to toppling his half-brother. But in the end, Daeron the Good prevailed. The rebellion was crushed, and Daemon Blackfire was slain on the field of battle. Yet the Blackfire cause did not die with him. It would endure as a shadow over the Targaryen dynasty, a persistent threat that would rise again in generations to come. The Red Dragon had won, but the Black Dragon had carved a wound into the heart of the realm that would not easily heal. And as Daeron the Good returned to his capital, he knew that the peace he had worked so hard to build was still fragile, still haunted by the ghosts of a rebellion that had come so close to succeeding. When Daeron II died in 209 AC, he left behind a realm that was intact but not fully at peace. Challenges of the years ahead would test the crown in ways that no one could have predicted. As the wounds of the rebellion continued to fester beneath the surface of courtly life, Daeron II, called the Good, had successfully brought dawn into the realm through marriage and diplomacy. But this new peace was built on unstable ground. To the traditionalist lords of the Reach and the Stormlands, the Dornish presence at court was a bitter insult, a foreign influence that weakened the ancient blood of the conqueror. And for them, there was a different kind of king worth rallying behind: Daemon Blackfire. The king's own father, Aegon IV, had placed the sword of Aegon the Conqueror into his hands, granting him the very name Blackfire. Daemon was everything a warrior lord could desire: strong, skilled with blade and lance, and utterly charismatic. When he took up that legendary blade, many lords saw the true king of Westeros, a king who looked and fought like the conqueror reborn. The realm was torn apart as lords chose between the legitimate but bookish Declan II and the charismatic rebel Daemon Blackfire. The first Blackfire rebellion had begun. The rebellion spread like wildfire through the southern kingdoms. House Rain declared for the Black Dragon. House Ironwood, the ancient rivals of House Martell, flocked to Daemon's banner. Sir Quentyn Ball, the master-at-arms of the Red Keep, abandoned his post and joined the rebels, his given name now secondary to his fearsome reputation as Fireball. Lords who felt slighted by the Dornish marriage, or who craved the glory and simplicity of a warrior king, took up arms against the throne. The divisions ran deep, even within families. The Blackwoods declared for Daemon, while their ancient rivals, the Brackens, declared for King Daeron. The seeds of this conflict had been sown in the tumultuous reign of the Unworthy King, and now they had sprouted into a full and bloody harvest. Daemon gathered his host near the river. Bittersteel, his half-brother and fiercest commander, drilled the men with relentless discipline. The Blackfire host marched north, aiming for the heart of the realm. For King's Landing itself, King Daeron II appointed his hand, Prince Baelor Breakspear, his son and heir, as the commander of the royal army, and with Baelor rode his uncle, Brynden Rivers, the spymaster known as Bloodraven, a man with white hair, a red birthmark covering half his face, and a cunning that was whispered to be sorcerous. His bow was carved from weirwood, and his arrows were fletched with the black feathers of his namesake ravens. The two armies met in the rolling hills south of the Blackwater, in the shadow of the Red Mountains of Dawn, a place that would forever be known as the Redgrass Field. The field was wide, the grass waist-high and golden in the autumn light, but it would soon be saturated with the deep crimson red of blood. The battle began at dawn. The Blackfire vanguard crashed into the Royalist centre with tremendous force. Sir Quentyn Ball led the initial charge, but he was struck down early by an arrow, not by a lord or a knight, but by a common archer. The loss of Fireball was a deep psychological blow to the rebels, a wound before the real steel had even been drawn. The Royalists had the numbers, but the Blackfires had the fury. Daemon Blackfire himself led the great cavalry charge of the rebellion. He rode into the fray with Blackfire in hand, the blade of Aegon the Conqueror singing through the air, trailing a wake of fallen foes. He cut through the Kingsguard. He scattered the Dornish spearmen who formed the Royalist line. His twin sons, Aegon and Aemon, fought beside him like young dragons, and for a shining, terrible moment it seemed the day was his. His warhammer rose and fell, and men died. The Royalist line began to buckle under the weight of the Blackfire attack. But as Daemon broke through the enemy lines, his charge left his flanks exposed. He rode up a small ridge, searching the field for his rival, searching for Baelor Breakspear. An arrow thudded into his chest, and then another and another. They came from the tree line, loosed by the raven's teeth, the elite archers of Bloodraven. The rebel king fell from his horse, his lifeblood soaking into the red grass. His sons died moments later beside him, arrows finding their throats and hearts. The rebellion reached its climax at the Battle of Redgrass Field, where Daemon Blackfire was slain by the Royalist sorcerer Bloodraven. It was an ignoble end for a man who had burned so brightly. Killed by arrows from a hidden position, his legend cut short not by a great duel, but by a shadow, a whisper of sorcery from the trees. The battle became a slaughter. The pretender was dead, but chaos still reigned on the field. Bittersteel, seeing the day was lost, did not surrender. He gathered the remaining Blackfire loyalists around him. He saw the bodies of his half-brother and nephews lying in the mud, and a cold, undying fury took hold of him. He grabbed Daemon's surviving young sons, Aegon and Daemon II, and threw them onto horses. With the future of the cause in his hands, Bittersteel cut a bloody path through the Royalist lines. His sword, a Valyrian steel blade called Lamentation, leaving a trail of broken bodies. He fled the field not as a beaten man, but as a man carrying a future war. Bittersteel fled to Essos with Daemon's surviving sons. He did not let the dream of the Black Dragon die. Across the narrow sea, beyond the reach of King Daeron's justice, Bittersteel gathered the exiles, the knights who had chosen the Black Dragon and lost their lands, the lords who were attainted and their sons, the thousands of men who had nowhere else to go. He forged them into a company of sellswords unlike any other, a company of lords and knights who had lost everything in Westeros but their honour and their hatred. They called themselves the Golden Company, for their banners were of gold, and their hearts were true to the exiled dragon. Their motto was a promise: our word is as good as gold. And their word was that one day a Blackfire would sit the Iron Throne. The rebellion was over, but its echo would never fade. The realm was scarred to its very foundation. The Redgrass Field was a sea of mud and blood, where brother had fought brother. Thousands of men lay dead. King Daeron's reign continued, but the shadow of the Black Dragon hung over his court and over every king who followed. Across the narrow sea, the Golden Company grew in strength, waiting, drilling, sharpening their swords for the day they would return. The peace Daeron the Good had won was a fragile one, built upon a field of dead dragons and the undying hatred of the exiled. The storms of the first Blackfire rebellion had passed, but the clouds remained on the horizon, dark and heavy, waiting to break once more. The Battle of Redgrass Field had ended in victory for the crown, but the peace it brought proved terribly fragile. In the year 209 after the Conquest, a far deadlier enemy arrived in Westeros than any Blackfire pretender. The Great Spring Sickness swept through the kingdoms with terrifying speed. It was utterly impartial, and it did not care for royal blood or righteous causes. King Daeron the Good, the architect of Dornish peace, was one of its first and most grievous victims. He died within weeks. His son and heir, Baelor Breakspear, the hero of Redgrass Field, followed him into the grave. And then came Baelor's own sons, Valar and Materys. The line of succession, so carefully stabilised by Daeron, was shattered in a single terrible season. The realm was plunged into grief and deep uncertainty. The crown thus fell to the fourth son of Daeron II, a man named Aerys. Aerys Targaryen had never expected to be king. He had spent his entire life avoiding the very thing he was now forced to accept. He was a scholar by nature, a man who found far more comfort in the pages of dusty tomes than in the clamour of court. He was obsessed with ancient Valyrian prophecy, with the secrets of dragon lore, with the coded riddles left by the founding rulers of his house. He believed that the true power of the Targaryens lay not in swords or taxes, but in the lost magic of their ancestors. And so, Aerys I made a decision that would define his entire reign. He chose not to rule. He built himself a sanctuary in the deepest recesses of the Red Keep, surrounding himself with scrolls and manuscripts from the Citadel and from Dragonstone itself. He left the burden of the Seven Kingdoms entirely to his hand. That hand was Brynden Rivers, the man known as Bloodraven, the great bastard who had killed Daemon Blackfyre with a magic arrow from across the battlefield. The king shut himself away with his books, and the Raven ruled in his place. Bloodraven was a man of absolute pragmatism and absolute ruthlessness. He did not rule through charisma or love. He ruled through fear and information. He saw enemies everywhere, and he was determined that no second Blackfyre rebellion would ever catch the throne unawares. He constructed a vast and totalitarian spy network, the first of its kind in the history of Westeros. He filled the capital with informants, recruited agents from every level of society, and rewarded those who brought him secrets. The dungeons of the Red Keep swelled with prisoners who had whispered the wrong name. His personal guard, the Raven's Teeth, were the most feared archers in the realm, silent enforcers of their master's iron will. When the Second Blackfyre Rebellion rose, in the year 211, Bloodraven was already waiting. A pretender calling himself Daemon II rallied a small force and tried to ignite the old fires of rebellion. But Bloodraven had known of the plot from the very beginning. His spies had followed every step of the conspiracy. The rebellion was crushed before it could truly find its footing. The pretender captured and executed before the conflict could spread. It was a chilling demonstration of how completely Bloodraven had come to control the realm. The lords and the small folk alike learned that there was no escape from his gaze. The reign of Aerys I became an oddity in the history of the Targaryen dynasty. A king who ruled for 12 years but barely governed. A hand who wielded absolute power from behind a throne of books. Bloodraven's methods kept the peace, but they also planted deep seeds of resentment among the High Lords. The law became the hand's personal weapon, wielded against anyone who dared question the crown. Aerys himself seemed barely to notice. He remained in his library, searching for dragons, searching for the prince that was promised, searching for any meaning beyond the tedious business of ruling. He neglected his wife, Queen Eleanor, and produced no heir. When he finally died, in the year 221, the throne passed directly to his brother, a warrior king named Mycah, who had spent his entire life in the shadow of his older and more celebrated siblings. Mycah's reign would be short and hard, a grinding campaign of keeping a restless realm in check, and his own death would prove just as strange as his brother's life, opening the path for a king who had never expected to wear the crown at all. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. When Aerys I died without issue, the crown passed to the fourth son of Daeron II, Maekar Targaryen was never meant to be king. 3 brothers stood before him in the line of succession. Baelor Breakspear, the eldest and the golden son, was slain at Ashford Meadow. Aerys, the second son, had ruled for 12 years but left no heirs. The third brother, Rhaegal, had died before Aerys, leaving children who were either dead or too weak to hold the realm. The crown then fell to Maekar. He came to the throne in his 50s, a stern and unyielding warrior who had spent his life in the field. He fought in the Blackfire rebellions. He commanded armies, but he had always lived in the shadow of his brothers. Baelor was the favourite, the tournament champion, the diplomat. Aerys was the scholar, lost in his books and prophecies. Maekar was the Anvil. He was blunt, grim and practical. He lacked their charm, and he carried a terrible weight. In the trial by 7 that killed Baelor Breakspear, it was Maekar's own mace that struck him down. It was an accident, a tragic miscalculation, but it defined him. As king, Maekar I was determined to rule with strength. He had seen his brother Aerys let the realm drift, leaving power in the hands of the spymaster Bloodraven. Maekar ended that. He ruled with a harsh but fair hand. He punished disloyalty without hesitation and rewarded those who served the crown well. The treasury was restored. The king's justice was swift. There were no lavish feasts or tournaments at his court, only the steady work of ruling. He was respected for his strength, but he was never loved. His end came as he lived in the thick of battle. In the 233rd year after the Conquest, Lord Peak of Starpike rose in rebellion. Maekar, the old warrior, marched at the head of his army. He was no king to sit safely in a tent while his men fought. He led from the front. During the siege of Starpike, a falling rock struck the king. It crushed him instantly. The Anvil of the realm was dead. His death threw the line of succession into chaos once more. Maekar had sons, but none of them were simple. The eldest, Daeron, was a drunkard. The second son, Aerion Brightflame, was cruel and unstable, a man who had drunk wildfire to prove a point and died in agony years before his father. The third son, Aemon, had taken the maester's chain and then the black, removing himself from all claims. That left only the fourth and youngest son, a boy who had been raised as a squire, a boy of humble tastes and a practical mind. He was the least likely king in the history of the dynasty, but he was the next in line. His name was Aegon, the fifth of his name, but history would remember him as Aegon the Unlikely because of the sheer number of deaths in the royal line and the questionable fitness of the remaining candidates. A great council was called in the year 233 to decide who would wear the crown. The lords of the realm gathered in King's Landing to debate the succession. They rejected the infant son of the cruel Aeron, fearing the child might inherit his father's madness. They bypassed the simple-minded daughter of Daeron. They even offered the crown to Maester Aemon, but he refused, steadfast in his vows to the Citadel. To ensure he could never be used in plots against his brother, Aemon chose to take the black and depart for the Wall, accompanied by the disgraced spymaster Bloodraven. Thus the crown was placed upon the head of Aegon. Aegon was a king unlike any who had come before. He had spent his youth wandering the Seven Kingdoms as a squire to a humble hedge knight, Sir Duncan the Tall. Travelling under the alias of Egg, he had slept in haylofts, eaten in common taverns, and felt the bite of cold and hunger. He knew the small folk not as subjects to be ruled from afar, but as flesh and blood people to be protected. This upbringing shaped every decision of his reign. Aegon sought to reform the laws of the land, granting rights and protections to the common people that they had never known before. But these reforms came at a heavy cost. The great lords of Westeros viewed his decrees an assault on their ancient privileges. For much of his reign, Aegon faced constant defiance, riots and rebellions from noble houses who refused to surrender their power over the small folk. To make matters worse, his own children defied him. Aegon had hoped to secure powerful alliances by betrothing his sons and daughters to the great houses of the realm. But one by one they broke their vows to marry for love, mirroring their father's own marriage to Betha Blackwood. Frustrated by his inability to enforce his laws and bring lasting peace to the realm, Aegon became obsessed with a single dangerous idea. He believed that the only way to make the proud lords obey his reforms was through the absolute power of dragons. If he could hatch the stone eggs that remained in the possession of House Targaryen, he could restore the dynasty to its former glory. This obsession culminated in the tragic year 259 at the pleasure palace of Summerhall. Aegon gathered his family, his loyal Lord Commander Sir Duncan, and the master pyromancers to attempt a great summoning. They used wildfire, prayers, and ancient sorcery to coax life from the stone eggs, but the magic spiraled out of control. A devastating fire swept through the palace, consuming everything and everyone in its path. King Aegon V, his eldest son Duncan the Small, and the heroic Sir Duncan the Tall all perished in the flames. It was a night of profound tragedy, but also one of destiny. For as the palace burned, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen was born amidst the smoke and grief, a child of ashen song, carrying the weight of a dynasty that had just lost its saviour. The year is 233 after the Conquest. King Maekar I, the Anvil of the realm, has fallen. His death was sudden, brutally unceremonious for a warrior king. A mace to the skull during the siege of Starpike, and the reign of a stern, hard man was over. In his wake, he left a succession crisis so tangled that it threatened to plunge the realm into an entirely new civil war. Maekar had 4 sons. One had died of a wasting pox, leaving a simple-minded daughter. One was the mad Aryan Bright Flame, who had famously drunk a flagon of wildfire in the belief that he would transform into a dragon, leaving an infant son. One was a maester of the Citadel, sworn to a lifetime of service. And the last was a 4th son, a man who had spent his youth squiring for a hedge knight, who had seen the good and the bad of the realm from the mud of the tourney grounds. The Iron Throne had no clear heir. Into this void stepped a man of shadows, Brynden Rivers, the Blood Raven, the Master of Whisperers, the most feared spy master in Westerosi history, had been rotting in a black cell for 10 years, arrested by Maekar for the murder of his half-brother, Aenys Blackfire, under a banner of peace. But the realm was in danger. Maekar was dead and no one knew what to do. Bloodraven was the only mind in the realm who could grasp the full complexity of the disaster. Some say he was released by the regents who knew his worth. Some say he simply acted from the darkness, sending ravens, whispering secrets through the stone. Whatever the truth, he summoned a great council to settle the succession. This was the first great council since the one that had elected Viserys I, over a century ago, a peaceful legal mechanism designed to prevent war. Bloodraven knew that if the lords did not choose a king in a room, they would choose one on a battlefield. The lords answered his summons, gathering in King's Landing to decide the fate of the dynasty. The Great Council of 233 was a tense affair. Lords from every corner of the realm sat in judgment over the royal family. The first candidate was Prince Maegor, the infant son of Aryan Brightflame. Aryan had been a monster, a man who delighted in cruelty and who had died in grotesque agony, his body consumed by his own arrogance. The lords looked at his son and saw a shadow of the father. They did not want a 16-year regency filled with scheming lords and ambitious uncles. They rejected the child outright. Next came Maester Aemon. Aemon was brilliant, kind and wise beyond his years. He had been sent to the Citadel precisely to protect him from the schemes of his brothers. When the crown was offered, Aemon refused. He knew his vows. He knew that, if he stayed in the world, he would be a threat to whoever took the throne. To ensure the peace, to bind the wounds of his family before they could even open, Aemon volunteered for the Night's Watch. He gave up every title, every right, every worldly possession, and sailed north into the cold. It was a sacrifice of profound selflessness, a decision that would keep a quiet maester alive for over 100 years, watching the rise and fall of his entire dynasty from the edge of the world. This left Aegon, the 4th son of a 4th son, the man they called the Unlikely. He was a man who had never expected to sit a throne. He had spent his youth as Egg, the squire of Sir Duncan the Tall. He had slept under the stars. He had eaten at the tables of small folk. He had seen the injustice of the lords firsthand. The lords of the Great Council looked at this man and saw a safe, stable candidate who was married to Betha Blackwood, a woman of the faith. He had sons and daughters of healthy stock. He had no great enemies, no bloody history of court intrigue. The council voted, and Aegon V was crowned King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. He took the name Aegon the Unlikely with a quiet smile, a name that celebrated his humble rise. And what of the man who had orchestrated the entire council? What of Bloodraven? He had served the realm, but he had served it with poison, lies, and murder. The lords remembered the death of Aenys Blackfyre under a banner of peace, a violation of law that had never been forgiven. They demanded Bloodraven's head. King Aegon V had no love for Bloodraven's methods. He had grown up in the shadow of the Spymaster's spies, and he knew that a new reign must be free of the old rot. To keep the peace, to start his rule with clean hands, Aegon ordered Bloodraven's arrest. The great Spymaster was stripped of his lands and titles. His life was spared, but he was exiled to the Night's Watch. Bloodraven took the Black without a struggle. He had gambled one last time and lost. He journeyed north, eventually becoming the Lord Commander of the Wall, and there he vanished into the forests of the haunted north, becoming a living legend, a greenseer who watched the centuries pass from the roots of a weirwood tree. His age stretched into decades, his body fading into the wood, his mind lingering in the dreams of ravens. So began the reign of Aegon the Unlikely, a king who loved his people, a king who wanted to restore the dignity of the small folk, a king who fought against the nobility for the right of every man to a fair trial. The Great Council of 233 was a moment of peace, a rare instance where the dynasty chose wisdom over war. But the lords of Westeros did not want a king who interfered with their power over their lands. Aegon's reign became a bitter, grinding struggle against the great houses. He fought, and he often lost, and in his quiet desperation to secure his throne and protect the realm, he turned to the oldest power of his bloodline. He turned to the fire. The final chapter of his reign would not be fought with steel, but with the desperate hope of a dragon's egg and a summer pyre. The Great Council of 2333 placed the crown upon the head of a man who had never expected to wear it. Aegon V was the fourth son of a fourth son, a prince who had spent his boyhood and youth wandering the length and breadth of the Seven Kingdoms, a squire to a hedge knight, known only by the common name of Egg. This experience fundamentally shaped how he saw the realm. Unlike any Targaryen king before him, Aegon V had lived among the common people. He had slept beneath their roofs, shared their meals, and listened to their grievances firsthand. When he finally sat the Iron Throne, he did not rule from a distant, uncaring height. He carried with him a deep commitment to changing the world he had seen up close. He used his intimate knowledge of the small folk to enact a sweeping series of pro-peasant reforms. These laws were designed to limit the unchecked power of the nobility, granting the common people new rights in the royal courts, and placing restrictions on the feudal exactions that kept them bound in poverty. But the High Lords of Westeros did not share their king's vision. To them, the small folk were their source of strength, their labour, their soldiers. A king who empowered the peasantry was a king who was actively weakening the lords. They viewed Aegon's reforms not as justice, but as a profound infringement upon their ancient feudal rights. The nobility fiercely resisted every measure he proposed. They closed ranks against him, using their influence in court and in their own territories to stonewall the crown. Aegon found himself increasingly isolated, a reformer king surrounded by a hostile aristocracy that fundamentally rejected his entire agenda. To shore up his political position, Aegon V had devised a grand strategy of marriage alliances for his children. His eldest son, Prince Duncan, was betrothed to a daughter of House Baratheon. His second son, Aerys, was promised to a princess of the Reach, but the king's children refused to play their parts in his grand design. They defied their father. They married for love, not duty. Duncan broke his powerful betrothal to wed a mysterious woman named Jenny of Oldstones. Aerys and his sister Shara entered into a secret marriage of their own, ignoring the alliances their father had so painstakingly built. With these acts of defiance, Aegon's entire political marriage strategy collapsed around him, leaving the king completely isolated, betrayed not by his enemies, but by his own blood, cornered by a hostile nobility, and abandoned by his children. Aegon V knew his reforms would die with him if he did not find a way to command absolute authority. He turned to the source of the Targaryen dynasty's original power, dragons. He believed that if he could hatch dragons, he could wield the fear and awe that had made his ancestors invincible rulers. He gathered his family at the summer palace of Summerhall. What occurred there was a tragedy of immense proportions. A great fire consumed the castle, killing the king, his heir Prince Duncan, and the legendary Lord Commander Duncan the Tall. The dragon eggs did not hatch, they burned. The dream of the reformer king died in the flames, leaving behind a legacy of fragile, half-finished laws and deep resentment. The crown passed to his second son, Aerys, a king who had married for love and now inherited a fractured realm. The shadow of Summerhall, that desperate attempt to reclaim a vanished power, would hang over the remaining years of the Targaryen dynasty. Aerys II was a sickly man, but he possessed a sharp mind and a fierce determination to restore the authority of the Iron Throne. His reign, though lasting only 3 short years, would be defined by a conflict that tested the very foundations of the realm. The War of the Ninepenny Kings. On the stepstones, a band of ambitious sellswords, merchants and pirates, including the last of the Blackfire pretenders, Maelys the Monstrous, gathered to launch an invasion of Westeros. Aerys did not wait for the threat to reach his shores. He gathered the lords of the realm, demonstrating that despite the tragedy of Summerhall, the crown could still command the loyalty of the Seven Kingdoms. The war was brutal, but it ended in a decisive Targaryen victory when a young knight named Ser Barristan Selmy slew Maelys the Monstrous in single combat, finally ending the Blackfire threat that had plagued the dynasty for generations. Yet, Aerys' reign was also marked by a fateful decision driven by prophecy. Believing that the prince that was promised would be born of their line, he forced his children, Aerys and Rhaella, to marry. This union, born of mysticism and duty, would ultimately bear bitter fruit. When Aerys died of a sudden illness, his son ascended the throne as Aerys II. In his youth, Aerys was handsome, generous, and full of grand ambitions to build new canals, conquer the stepstones, and make the realm prosper. Alongside his brilliant and ruthless hand, Tywin Lannister, the young king, began his rule in an era of peace and abundance. But the seeds of madness were already planted, and the tragic cycle of the Targaryen dynasty was far from over. The resistance of the High Lords was a wall that Aegon V could not breach with words or laws alone. His entire reign had been a struggle against the entrenched power of the nobility, a struggle he ultimately failed to win. The king found himself isolated in the Red Keep, surrounded by his memories of a simpler life on the road. His friends among the small folk could not help him here. His own family was divided. The great houses looked at him not as a dragon lord, but as a troublesome king who had forgotten his place. Desperate to enforce his reforms against the rebellious lords, Aegon V became obsessed with a single, transforming purpose: the return of the dragons. The power that had made Aegon the Conqueror invincible, the power that had kept the Targaryen dynasty supreme for 3 centuries. If he could hatch a living dragon, the reign of the rebellious lords would end. The king would no longer need to plead for their cooperation. He could command it. This was not an idle dream or a fantasy of an old king. He devoted himself fully to the study of lost Valyrian lore. He searched the vaults of Dragonstone. He sent emissaries to the citadel. He consulted with the pyromancers of King's Landing. He became convinced that the spells of old Valyria were not entirely lost, only forgotten. He believed he could rediscover them. In the year 259 after the Conquest, the king decided to act. He gathered his closest family and friends at the Summer Palace of Summerhall for a mysterious fire ritual. Summerhall was an intimate place, a retreat from the formality of the Red Keep. The guests were few: his son and heir, Prince Duncan, who had given up a princess for love, his dearest friend, Lord Commander Duncan the Tall, the legendary knight from Flea Bottom, his daughter, Princess Rhaella, and his son, Prince Jaehaerys. These were the people he trusted most in the world. Together, they would witness the rebirth of the dragon. What happened within the walls of Summerhall remains a subject of endless debate among historians and maesters. What is certain is that the ritual went horribly wrong. A massive conflagration tore through the palace, a pillar of wild flame that could be seen for miles across the surrounding countryside. The tragedy was absolute. King Aegon V, the unlikely king who had wandered the realm and dreamed of a better world for the common man, died in the flames. Prince Duncan, his heir, died beside him. Sir Duncan the Tall, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, the greatest knight of his age, was lost in the fire as well, attempting to fulfill his vows to the very end. The only survivors were Prince Jaehaerys, his sister Rhaella, and a handful of others who managed to escape the inferno. Summerhall was destroyed. The dream of a restoration was over. The Targaryen dynasty had gambled everything on the fire of the dragon and lost. With the death of the king and the prince, the succession fell to Jaehaerys II. He had escaped the fire, but the smoke of Summerhall clung to him. His reign would be short, only 3 years, a time of quiet consolidation and somber reflection. He was a king who understood the fragility of power, having seen it evaporate in a single night of terrible flame. Jaehaerys II passed the crown to his son, Aerys II. Aerys had been present at Summerhall. He had seen the flames. He had seen his grandfather die. He had seen the failure of the Targaryen magic. That knowledge, that trauma, would fester within him for years. The wheel of Targaryen history had turned decisively. The dynasty was now in the hands of a young man who had witnessed the fire and who carried the weight of a shattered legacy. In the early years of his reign, Aerys II did not look like a madman. He was handsome, generous, and full of grand plans for the realm. He spoke of building a new wall to the far north, of bringing fresh water to the deserts of Dawn, and of carving a new city out of the stone of the Kingswood. To help him realize these dreams, the young king appointed his boyhood friend, Tywin Lannister, as his Hand of the King. Together, the youthful king and his brilliant, ruthless hand brought peace and prosperity to the Seven Kingdoms. For a time, it seemed that the wounds of Summerhall might finally heal, but the shadow of that ruinous night was long, and it stretched over the Red Keep like a silent predator. As the years passed, the grand plans of the king began to wither, replaced by a growing resentment of his own hand. The lords of Westeros whispered that it was Tywin Lannister who truly ruled the realm, while Aerys was merely a figurehead wearing a crown of gold. This whisper, soft at first, became a roaring fire in the mind of the king. The paranoia that had been planted in the ashes of Summerhall began to bloom. Aerys saw enemies in every shadow, conspirators in every corner of his court. He became obsessed with wildfire, the very substance that had destroyed his family, as if by controlling the flame, he could master the fear that consumed him. The tragedy of the Targaryens was, in their quest to reclaim the power of the dragon, they had instead invited the madness of the dragon into their own bloodline. The dynasty, stripped of its ancient beasts, was now utterly exposed to the ambitions of mortal men, setting the stage for a rebellion that would wash away 300 years of history in a torrent of blood and steel. The flames of Summerhall had barely cooled before a new king was crowned. Aegon the Unlikely was gone, along with his eldest son, Duncan, and the dream of restoring dragons to the world. The crown passed to his second son, Jaehaerys, who became Jaehaerys II. He inherited a realm that was mourning, but he had no time to grieve. The realm itself was still standing, but a threat from across the narrow sea demanded his attention before the ashes were even swept from the throne room. Jaehaerys II succeeded his father and was immediately forced to confront the war of the Ninepenny Kings in the Stepstones. The conflict had been brewing for some time. What remained of the Blackfyre line, once the great rival house of the Targaryens, had allied with a band of sellsword captains and exiled lords known as the Band of Nine. These 9 leaders sought to carve out new kingdoms for themselves, and they began their conquest in the lawless islands of the Stepstones. At their head was Maelys, the Monstrous, the last of the Blackfyre pretenders, a brute of a man whose strength and cruelty were legendary. He was a genuine threat, not just to the Stepstones, but to the entire realm. The Iron Throne responded with the full weight of its power. A coalition of Westerosi lords sailed east to crush this rebellion before it could spill onto the shores of the Seven Kingdoms. It was here that the next generation of great leaders cut their teeth. The coalition was led by men like Ormond Baratheon, but fighting alongside him were the young talents who would define the coming era. Tywin Lannister, the heir to Casterly Rock, commanded a contingent of Westerland knights and displayed the cold, calculating brilliance that would make him one of the most feared men in the realm. By his side fought Steffon Baratheon and a young knight of the Kingsguard named Barristan Selmy. In the decisive battle, it was Ser Barristan who personally slew Maelys the Monstrous in single combat, ending the Blackfyre threat forever. The line of the male pretenders was extinguished in the mud and blood of the Stepstones. The war was a triumph. The realm was saved from a foreign invasion, and the Targaryen dynasty had finally closed the book on its bitterest internal feud, a feud that had haunted the throne since the days of Aegon the Unworthy. But for Jaehaerys II, the cost of this victory was becoming clear. He had never been a robust man. He was often described as sickly, and the burden of kingship, the strain of war, wore heavily upon him. The maesters could do little. Whatever illness gripped the king was a slow, wasting thing that could not be cured by potions or prayers. Jaehaerys died of illness after only 3 years on the throne. His reign was brief, almost an afterthought in the long pageant of Targaryen history, but it was a vital one. He had held the realm together in a moment of profound crisis and had ensured a smooth succession. The crown passed to his young, charismatic son, Aerys II. Aerys was everything his father was not. Tall, handsome, charming, and full of fiery energy, he was the very image of a dragon lord. The realm looked upon the dawn of his reign with immense hope. A new era was beginning, an era that would be shaped by the young lions who had fought together in the Stepstones. Tywin Lannister was already rising to power, and the young king trusted him implicitly. The Targaryen dynasty seemed stable again, reborn from the ashes of Summerhall and the fires of the Stepstones. But the stability of the realm was a fragile thing, built on the shoulders of a young king who was about to face trials very different from those of his father. In his first major act as king, Aerys made a choice that would define the next 20 years of Westerosi history. He appointed his friend, Tywin Lannister, as Hand of the King. Tywin was only 20 years old, the youngest man ever to hold the office, but his competence was undeniable. Under Tywin's stern and efficient administration, the Seven Kingdoms entered a period of peace and remarkable prosperity. Roads were repaired, trade flourished, and the treasury grew full. For a time, it seemed as though the promise of Aerys' youth was being fully realised. But beneath the surface of this golden age, a dangerous poison was brewing. As the years passed, the lords and common folk alike began to whisper a dangerous truth. They said that it was not Aerys who ruled the realm, but Tywin Lannister. They whispered that when Tywin sat upon the Iron Throne to dispense justice, he looked more like a king than Aerys ever did. These whispers eventually reached the ears of the king. Aerys, proud and increasingly sensitive, grew deeply resentful of his hand's reputation. The warm friendship that had bound the two men since their youth in the Stepstones began to curdle into jealousy and suspicion. Aerys started to undermine Tywin at every turn, rejecting his counsels and insulting his pride in public. The Golden Reign was beginning to fracture, and the shadow of madness was waiting in the wings, ready to consume them all. Jaehaerys II ruled for barely 3 years. The war in the Stepstones was over, the last of the Blackfire pretenders slain, and the realm breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the king himself did not have the constitution for a long reign. He had always been sickly, and the stress of the conflict had worn him down to nothing. In the year 262, after Aegon's conquest, he passed away, leaving the 7 kingdoms in the hands of his eldest son. That son was Aerys, the second of his name. And the realm looked upon him with a hope that had been absent for generations. If you had looked at Aerys Targaryen in the first year of his reign, you would have seen everything a kingdom could ask for in a sovereign. He was young, just past his 20th name day. He was handsome in the classic Targaryen way, with silver gold hair and a sharp, regal bearing. He had a quick wit, a grand vision, and an energy that the court had not seen since the days of the Conciliator. He spoke of building a new maiden vault, of restoring the glory of the capital, of leaving a mark on the world that would be remembered for 1,000 years. The lords were charmed by him. The small folk adored him. Aerys began his reign with immense popularity, promising to usher in a new age of prosperity and ambition for all of Westeros. It was a true golden dawn for the Targaryen dynasty, but even a golden king needs a strong foundation. Aerys was clever enough to know that grand visions required practical hands to make them real. For that, he looked to the man who had distinguished himself most. In the recent war, the young lion who had commanded the forces of the West against the Golden Company. At the age of just 23, Tywin Lannister was appointed Hand of the King. It seemed the perfect union, the young dragon and the young lion, ruling side by side. Tywin was brilliant, tireless, and ruthlessly efficient. He was born to organize, born to command. He brought order to a court that had grown lax. He rooted out corruption in the royal household. He balanced the ledgers of the realm. Under his steady iron hand, the 7 kingdoms began to flourish, in a way they had not done since the death of the last dragon. Trade routes grew rich. The roads were kept safe. The royal treasury swelled. For 20 years the peace held. For 20 years, the economy grew stronger and stronger. The lords of Westeros knew that when they needed something done, they went to Tywin, and when they wanted to be seen, they smiled for the king. And there, in that subtle divide, lay the seed of the poison. Aerys saw the way the lords deferred to his hand. He saw the way the small folk cheered louder for Lord Lannister than they ever did for their king. He saw the reputation of Tywin Lannister growing day by day, and he felt his own reputation shrinking in its shadow. Aerys had wanted to be the greatest king since Aegon the Conqueror. Instead, he was becoming the figurehead of a kingdom run by lions. The king's growing jealousy of Tywin's reputation as the true ruler of the realm began to poison their relationship. It was a slow poison at first, subtle and insidious. It started with a barbed comment here, a withheld honor there. Aerys began to keep Tywin waiting outside the throne room. He began to mock the Lannisters in private conversations. He started taking petty slights as deep personal insults. The closer Tywin came to absolute authority, the more Aerys felt the need to push him away. The years of prosperity continued, but the personal bond was shattered. Aerys began to obsess over creating his own legacy, separate from the shadow of his hand. He planned a massive tournament, the greatest the realm had ever seen, hoping to be seen as a glorious host in his own right. But the shadow of the lion was long. Every time Aerys looked at Tywin, he saw the man who had robbed him of the adoration he craved. The laughter of the court became the snickering of enemies in his ears. The quiet efficiency of his hand became a personal affront to his authority. The king's mind, once so sharp and visionary, began to turn inward. It fed on suspicion. It grew fearful and paranoid. The prosperity remained, But the man who had promised a golden age was slowly disappearing into a haze of pride and resentment. The partnership that had built the peace was crumbling, and with it, the sanity of the king. The golden promise had begun to curdle. The golden years of Aerys II's reign were not to last. For 20 years, Tywin Lannister served as his hand, guiding the realm through a period of peace and prosperity unseen since the days of the old king. But Aerys was a man of deep vanity. He craved the credit for this golden age, yet every day, the respect of the great lords was directed at the Warden of the West, not the monarch on the throne. This jealousy festered. The first true crack appeared in the year 277 after the Conquest, in a place called Duskendale. Lord Denys Darklyn, a proud and touchy man, chafed against the crown's authority, refusing to pay the royal customs. Aerys summoned him to court, imprisoned him for a time, and then released him with a reprimand. But Denys Darklyn did not forget the humiliation. He saw a path to revenge that no lord had ever dared to walk. He sent word to the Red Keep that he wished to make peace, offering to submit fully to the king's justice and pay a heavy indemnity. He asked that the king come to Duskendale to witness his submission in person. It seemed a generous offer, a public act of reconciliation. Despite the objections of Tywin Lannister and his own Kingsguard, Aerys agreed. He was ever hungry for displays of loyalty and submission. He rode Duskendale with a small escort. The moment he passed through the town gates, the portcullis slammed down behind him. Lord Denys Darklyn had taken the king of the Seven Kingdoms hostage. Tywin Lannister did not hesitate. He gathered the armies of the Crownlands and surrounded Duskendale by land and sea. Lord Denys immediately sent out his terms. He wanted a royal charter, granting Duskendale independence from the Crown's trade laws, and he wanted Tywin Lannister removed as Hand of the King. Tywin refused every demand. When Lord Denys threatened to drag the king onto the walls of the town and execute him for all to see, Tywin gave no ground. He simply continued building his siege towers and engines, preparing for a final assault that everyone knew would result in the king's death. It was a cold and calculated gambit. Tywin Lannister was willing to see Aerys die, rather than let a single rebellious lord dictate terms to the Iron Throne. He would sacrifice the king to preserve the principle of royal authority. The entire realm watched in terrified silence. Inside the walls of Duskendale, the king's mind began to shatter. He was held hostage for 6 months. He was kept in a cold, dark cell, dressed in rags and fed scraps. Aerys became convinced that Tywin Lannister wanted him dead so he could claim the throne for himself. He began to see enemies lurking in every shadow, but there was one man who refused to give up on the king, Sir Barristan Selmy of the Kingsguard. Under the cover of a moonless night, Sir Barristan scaled the sheer cliffs below the Dun Fort and climbed the outer walls of the castle. He moved silently through the stronghold, killing the Duskendale guards with quiet precision. He found the king in his cell, a broken figure, hollow-eyed and thin. Barristan cut a path through the fortress, fought his way to the stables, put the king on a horse, and rode for the gate. The alarm was raised, but Barristan did not stop. He faced the captain of the Duskendale garrison on the road and killed him with a single brutal thrust of his lance. It was one of the most legendary feats of arms in the history of Westeros. Aerys II was free, but the man who returned to King's Landing was a ghost of the one who had left. 6 months in the hands of an enemy had shattered his trust in the world. He saw traitors lurking behind every friendly smile, every whispered word, every stone column. He no longer saw Tywin Lannister as a loyal servant, but as a rival who had proven he would let the king die. Aerys became obsessed with wildfire, with fire, with the idea that everyone was plotting against him. The golden promise of his early reign was completely extinguished by the darkness he had endured in a dungeon cell. The seeds of the dynasty's final collapse were not planted on the Trident or within the walls of the Red Keep during the war that would eventually consume him. They were sown in the damp darkness of Duskendale, where a king who once promised so much finally lost his mind to fear. The Defiance at Duskendale broke something inside Aerys II. Though he was rescued by the armies of Tywin Lannister, the king never truly escaped that dungeon. His hair turned white and brittle. His nails grew long and black, resembling claws. He refused to be shaved by anyone holding a blade. The man who returned to King's Landing was not the Golden Prince of 20 years earlier. He was a wounded creature, suspicious of everyone even, and perhaps especially the man who had saved him. From that day on, Aerys retreated into the Red Keep, withdrawing into the deepest chambers of Maegor's Holdfast. He refused to let any sharp objects near him. He would not allow a barber's razor to approach his own throat. Lords and servants who sought an audience were searched for the smallest knife. The king was convinced that Tywin Lannister, the realm's most powerful lord, and his hand of 20 years, was secretly plotting his death. Despite Tywin, Aerys appointed his son Prince Rhaegar to preside over the small council instead. But even then, his paranoia found no peace. He began to develop an obsession with wildfire, the ancient alchemical substance that could burn an entire city to ash. He loved to watch it burn, to smell its acrid smoke. He whispered to pyromancers in the dead of night, ordering caches of the substance to be hidden all throughout the city, beneath the streets, under the very foundations of the great Sept of Baelor. He was arming himself against ghosts. While the king decayed within his own fortress, the heir to the Iron Throne gave the realm a wound from which it could not recover. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen was a man of contradictions, a warrior who loved music, a melancholy soul. At the great tournament at Harrenhal, he had passed over his own wife, Elia of Dorne, the name Lyanna Stark, the Queen of Love and Beauty. Lyanna was a wild northern beauty, betrothed to Robert Baratheon, the Lord of Storm's End. It was an insult and a puzzle that sparked whispers across the Seven Kingdoms. Then months later, Rhaegar and Lyanna disappeared together. The realm did not know if it was love or abduction, but it knew one thing for certain. Prince Rhaegar had sparked a diplomatic crisis. He had dishonored the North, the Stormlands, and Dorne. The fragile peace that Aerys had once cultivated with Tywin Lannister collapsed entirely. The storm broke in the streets of King's Landing. Lyanna's eldest brother, Brandon Stark, rode to the capital in a fury. He stormed into the Red Keep, screaming for Rhaegar to come out and die. It was a reckless act born of love and rage. But Aerys II was waiting for him. Brandon was seized and thrown into the dungeon. The king declared it treason. He sent word to Winterfell, demanding that Rickard Stark, Lord of the North, answer for his son's crimes. Lord Rickard did not bring an army. He came alone, trusting in the king's justice. He was betrayed. Aerys brutally executed Rickard and Brandon Stark in the throne room of the Red Keep. He forced Lord Rickard to watch as a strangling device was tightened around his son's throat. Then he suspended the Lord of Winterfell in a suit of armour over a wildfire fire, mocking his request for a trial by combat. The king roasted him alive. As the flames consumed Rickard, Brandon strangled himself to death, trying to save his father. It was not enough for Aerys. He had been waiting for this. He had proof of a vast conspiracy, or so he thought. He demanded the heads of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark. He sent ravens to the Eyrie, commanding Jon Arryn to execute his two wards, Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon. Jon Arryn refused. In defiance of the crown, he raised his banners instead. The Lords of the Vale, the Stormlands, and the North did the same. The Mad King had given them no choice. He had burned their liege lord alive. He had called for the heads of their sons. The rebellion that would end the Targaryen dynasty had begun not with a battle, but with a pyre in the great hall of the Red Keep, lit by the king's own madness. The dynasty of dragons, which had ruled from the Iron Throne for nearly 3 centuries, had finally turned its fire upon itself. The great beast was dying, and it would take the realm down with it. The realm was already bleeding when the Mad King struck the spark that set it ablaze. Aerys II, paranoid and isolated in the Red Keep, had retreated so deeply into his own mind that he could no longer see the walls closing in. He demanded the heads of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark from their foster father, Jon Arryn. Arryn refused. Instead of delivering the heads to the throne, he raised his banners. The storm had broken. Robert's rebellion did not start as a single battle, but as a convulsion across the entire continent. The Stormlands rose for Robert, the North for Eddard Stark, the Riverlands for Hoster Tully, whose daughter was betrothed to the young Stark. Only the Reach, Dorne and the Crownlands remained loyal to the Iron Throne. For nearly a year, the war ravaged the countryside. It was a series of brutal skirmishes and pitched battles, culminating on the green banks of the Trident. Here at a place called the Ruby Ford, the rebel army met the royalist forces led by Prince Rhaegar himself. The battle was a savage, grinding clash of steel and men. It was an all-or-nothing gamble for the Targaryen dynasty. The fighting swirled across the river. It came down to a single legendary duel in the rushing water. Robert Baratheon, wielding a massive storm-forged warhammer, met Rhaegar Targaryen. The prince, the last great hope of his dynasty, died in the shallows of the Trident. His rubies scattered into the water, a final, shattered echo of the dragon's glory. With Rhaegar dead, the rebellion had effectively won. The war was over in all but name, but King's Landing still stood, and the Mad King still sat upon his throne. The rebel armies marched south, but it was not the wolves or the stags who delivered the fatal blow. It was a lion. Tywin Lannister had spent the war watching and calculating. He had served Aerys as Hand of the King for 20 years, building the kingdom's prosperity and power, only to be mocked and sidelined by the increasingly unstable king. Now, with the rebels closing in, Tywin made his move. He marched an army of 12,000 men to the gates of King's Landing. He declared his loyalty to the crown. King Aerys, desperate and deluded, saw a saviour and opened the gates. It was a fatal error. The moment the Lannister host was safely inside the city, they fell upon it. The sack of King's Landing was brutal and horrifically efficient. The gold cloaks of the City Watch and the armoured men of Casterly Rock tore through the streets. The Red Keep fell. Elia Martell, Rhaegar's wife, was murdered alongside her children, the infant Rhaenys and the babe Aegon. The Targaryen line, already broken on the Trident, was now shattered in the cradle. The murder of innocents stained the rebellion before it was even fully won. Inside the throne room, King Aerys was not thinking of surrender. He was not thinking of his family, or his legacy, or the future. He was thinking only of fire. For years, he had stockpiled secret caches of wildfire beneath the city, a madman's insurance policy against the end of the world. He had tasked his pyromancers, led by a man named Rossart, with this grim work. Now, with the enemy at the gates, with the Lannisters already inside the city, he gave the final command: burn them all. He wanted to destroy King's Landing utterly. He wanted to turn the capital of the Seven Kingdoms into a massive pyre, a funeral for the usurper and his allies. It would have killed everyone in the city, friend and foe alike. Only one man stood in his way: Sir Jaime Lannister, the youngest member of the Kingsguard, had been assigned to guard the king. He watched as Aerys dispatched Rossart to light the fuses. Jaime followed Rossart through the corridors and killed him. He tracked down the other pyromancers and cut them down as well. Then he returned to the throne room. He found the Mad King alone, sitting on the Iron Throne. Aerys ranted, begged, ordered him to kill his own father. But Jaime knew the city would burn if he hesitated. He drove his sword through the back of the Mad King. Aerys II died on the throne he had so thoroughly disgraced, and so the dynasty that had ruled Westeros for 283 years ended not with a grand battle of dragons, but with a broken oath and a pool of blood on the floor of an empty hall. The last dragon did not fall to a rebel hero, but to a sworn protector who chose the lives of a city over the honour of his vows. The city was spared. The Red Keep stood. Aerys's final command, his ultimate act of mad vanity, had been stopped. The Targaryen dynasty was nothing more than a memory now. Scattered across the narrow sea were the Queen and her son Viserys, the last of the male line. The dynasty had begun with Aegon the Conqueror 300 years ago. Landing on the shore of a continent, he would forge into a kingdom. It ended with an empty throne, a dead king, and a young knight in white armor waiting for the new age to begin. The dragons were gone. The age of the stag had come, but the shadows of the dragon's fall would hang over Westeros for a long, long time.